In the deepest shadows of Middle-earth's ancient history, where starlight barely penetrates the veil of forgotten time, there exists a tale of 9 souls who surrendered their mortality to darkness, becoming something far more terrible than death itself. These are the Nazgûl, the ring wraiths, whose story begins not in shadow, but in the golden light of the Second Age, when hope still flourished across the wide lands and the memory of the elder days burned bright in the hearts of elves and men alike. Long before the darkness claimed them, these 9 were kings and sorcerers among the race of men, rulers of great kingdoms that stretched across the southern and eastern reaches of Middle-earth. Their names have been lost to the turning of the ages, whispered away like autumn leaves on the wind. Yet their deeds in those early days were spoken of with reverence in the halls of their people. They were mighty in their own right, wielding power over armies and nations, commanding the respect of their subjects through strength of will and mastery of arts, both martial and mystical. The Second Age was a time of great making and great ambition, when the elves of Erosion wrought rings of power under the tutelage of one who called himself Annatar, the Lord of Gifts. Yet this fair-seeming being was none other than Sauron himself, the Dark Lord who had served as lieutenant to Morgoth in the terrible wars of the First Age. In the hidden fires of Mount Doom, in chambers deep beneath the earth where no light of sun or star could reach, Sauron forged in secret the One Ring, the master of all others, pouring into its golden circle his malice, his will, and his power to dominate all life. When the One Ring was completed, and Sauron first set it upon his finger, speaking the ring spell in the black speech of Mordor, the elves immediately perceived the trap that had been laid for them. They removed their rings and hid them, refusing to be enslaved. But the 9 rings crafted for mortal men had already been distributed to those kings and sorcerers who seemed most worthy of such gifts. These rings were beautiful beyond mortal craft, gleaming within a fire, and they promised their bearers power beyond imagining, the ability to see across great distances, to command the minds of lesser men, and to extend their lives far beyond the natural span allotted to their kind. At first, the transformation was subtle, creeping upon the 9 like mist rising from a quiet marsh at dawn. The rings enhanced their natural abilities, making them wiser in counsel, stronger in battle, more persuasive in speech. Their kingdoms prospered under their rule, and their people looked upon them with ever-growing awe. Yet with each passing year, the rings' influence deepened, and the bearers found themselves increasingly dependent upon the power that flowed through the golden bands upon their fingers. They began to notice that colours seemed less vivid when they removed their rings, that food tasted like ash, that the warmth of sunlight felt distant and cold. As decades turned to centuries, the 9 discovered that their lives had indeed been extended, but at a cost they had not foreseen. Their bodies began to fade, becoming translucent in bright light, while their perception shifted toward the Wraith-World, that shadow realm where spirits dwell. They could see things hidden from mortal eyes, perceive the movements of the unseen, but the world of the living grew ever more distant and dreamlike. Their subjects began to whisper that their kings cast no shadows at noon, that their footsteps made no sound upon stone, that their breath did not mist in the cold mountain air. The process of their transformation was neither swift nor merciful. Century by century, They felt their humanity slipping away like water through cupped hands, their emotions dulled and twisted, love becoming possessiveness, justice becoming cruel law, wisdom becoming cold calculation. They ruled their kingdoms with increasing harshness, their subjects cowering before them not out of respect, but from a primal fear they could not name. The warmth of human connection became a memory, then a dream, then nothing at all. When Sauron finally revealed himself and claimed dominion over all who bore the rings of power, the Nine were already so thoroughly changed that resistance was impossible. They had become extensions of his will, their faded souls bound to his purpose through the golden circles that had promised them glory, but delivered only servitude. In the great war that followed, as the last alliance of elves and men marched against the dark tower of Barad-dûr, the Nine rode forth as Sauron's most terrible servants, mounted upon horses as black as midnight, their forms shrouded in dark robes that billowed in winds no living creature could feel. Their weapons were not merely sword and mace, but fear itself, a terror so profound that it could stop the heart of a strong man and turn the bravest warrior into a gibbering wreck. Their voices carried the chill of the grave, and their breath brought despair to all who stood against them. They had become something that was neither alive nor dead, existing in a twilight realm where the normal laws that governed mortal flesh no longer held sway. Pain meant nothing to them, for their bodies were but shadows given form. Death meant nothing to them, for they had already passed beyond its reach. Yet even in their terrible transformation, echoes of their former selves remained, like distant stars glimpsed through heavy clouds. The greatest among them, who would one day be known as the Witch King of Angmar, retained the strategic brilliance that had once made him a renowned general. Another kept the sorcerous knowledge that had elevated him above his peers in the arts of magic. Each carried forward some twisted reflection of the gifts that had first made them worthy to receive the rings. But these abilities now served only the will of their dark master. When Sauron fell at the end of the Second Age, his physical form destroyed by the cutting of the ring from his hand, the Nine were diminished but not destroyed. They retreated into the shadows, waiting through the long years of the Third Age for their master's return. Some dwelt in the ruins of ancient fortresses. Others wandered the wild places where few dared to tread, all of them sustained by the power of their rings and the promise of their master's eventual resurrection. The centuries of waiting changed them further, if such a thing were possible. They became more wraith-like, more removed from the world of the living, existing in a state of perpetual hunger for the life and warmth they had lost. When they encountered mortals in those dark years, it was often as harbingers of doom, their presence bringing blight to growing things and madness to those who looked too long upon their shadowed forms. In the cold halls where they dwelt during those years of exile, time moved differently. Seasons passed unnoticed, years blurred together, like water flowing over smooth stones. They did not sleep, for sleep was a gift of the living, nor did they truly wake. For consciousness, as mortals understood, it was beyond their reach. Instead, they existed in a state of eternal vigilance, their attention fixed always upon the darkness in the east, waiting for the first stirring of their master's return to power. The very air around them grew thick with malice during those waiting years, and the places where they chose to dwell became cursed, shunned by all living things. Trees withered in their presence, streams ran black and bitter, and even the stones seemed to absorb something of their essence, remaining cold to the touch long after they had departed. They were no longer merely servants of evil, but had become channels through which the fundamental wrongness of Sauron's being flowed into the world. As the Third Age progressed, and Sauron began to stir once more in his fortress of Barad-dûr, the Nine felt the pull of his awakening were like iron filings drawn to a lodestone. One by one, they emerged from their hidden lairs and began the long journey back to Mordor, ready once again to serve as the instruments of their master's vengeance upon a world that had dared to defy him. Their return to active service marked a new chapter in the long history of shadow that had defined their existence. As they gathered once more in the black lands of Mordor, the Nine found themselves changed yet again by the centuries of separation and solitude. The bonds between them had deepened during their exile, forged not through companionship but through shared emptiness, a communion of absence that drew them together like echoes in a vast hollow chamber. They no longer remembered the faces they had worn in life, nor the names by which they had once been called, yet they recognized each other with the certainty of kindred darkness. Sauron, now taking the form of the necromancer in the fortress of Dol Guldur, began to test their renewed strength and loyalty. He sent them forth on missions that served both to accomplish his will and to measure the extent of their transformation. They moved through the world like living nightmares, their presence felt even when they remained unseen. Villages would wake to find their wells poisoned, their crops blighted, their livestock dead in the fields. Though no mortal eye had witnessed the passage of any enemy, the Nine had learned to spread their influence like a plague, touching the world with corruption even at a distance. During these early years of their renewed service, they began to take on the forms and titles by which they would become most feared. The Witch King emerged as their leader, his will the strongest among them, his connection to Sauron the most complete. He established himself in the ancient realm of Angmar, far to the north, where he began the long work of building an army of orcs, wolves, and darker things. From his fortress in that desolate land, he sent forth his malice like ripples on a dark pond, corrupting all it touched. The very name of Angmar became a curse upon the lips of those who dwelt in the northern lands, spoken only in whispers and always followed by words of warding. The others took up positions throughout Middle-earth according to their master's design, each becoming a node in a vast web of shadow that stretched across the continent. They learned to work in concert even when separated by hundreds of leagues, their thoughts flowing together through the darkness that connected all things touched by the power of the rings. When one of them sensed an opportunity or a threat, the knowledge would ripple through their shared consciousness like a stone dropped into still water, reaching the others without need for messenger or signal fire. In those days, they began to gather about themselves the trappings of earthly power that would make their presence more terrible to mortal minds. They donned great cloaks that seemed to drink in light itself, fashioned crowns of black iron that sat upon heads no longer there, and carried weapons that had been blessed by dark rituals in the fires of Mount Doom. Yet these were merely props in a grand performance of terror, for their true power lay not in steel or sorcery, but in the fundamental wrongness of their existence, the way they violated the natural order simply by continuing to be. The Witch King's war against the northern kingdoms of Arnor became a testing ground for the refined malice of the Nine. They learned to coordinate their attacks not just in the physical realm, but in the realm of spirit as well, spreading despair and hopelessness as surely as their armies spread fire and sword. Cities fell, not just to siege engines and orc blades, but to the creeping dread that preceded the arrival of the Nazgûl, a fear so profound that it sapped the will to resist before the first arrow was loosed or the first gate was breached. As the years turned to decades and the decades to centuries, the Nine became ever more attuned to the subtle currents of power that flowed through Middle-earth. They could sense the presence of the other rings of power, feeling them like distant stars in their perception, and they began to understand their role in the great design their master was weaving. They were not merely destroyers, but gatherers, tasked with the eventual recovery of all the rings that had been scattered when Sauron's first reign had ended. This knowledge filled them with a new purpose, a hunger that went beyond their endless craving for life and warmth, to encompass a more specific desire for the completion of their master's work. The fall of Fornost and the scattering of the Northern Kingdom marked the height of the Witch King's earthly conquests. Yet even in victory, the Nine found no satisfaction. Victory and defeat were concepts that belonged to the living, emotions that required a heart capable of feeling joy or sorrow. For the Nazgûl, success was merely the absence of failure, a temporary alignment of circumstances that allowed their master's will to flow more freely through the world. They celebrated nothing, mourned nothing, simply continued in their appointed tasks with the relentless patience of the tide. When the Witch King was eventually defeated at the Battle of Fornost and driven from the north, it was not shame or anger that filled him, but a cold calculation of lessons learned and weaknesses to be avoided in future campaigns. The other 8 felt his defeat through their shared consciousness, absorbing the knowledge of what had transpired and filing it away for future reference. They were learning, always learning, becoming more perfect instruments of their master's will with each passing year. The long peace that followed saw the Nine withdraw once more into shadow, but they did not return to the aimless wandering of their earlier exile. Now they moved with purpose, establishing networks of spies and servants throughout Middle-earth, corrupting those who could be turned and eliminating those who could not. They learned to work through intermediaries, finding that mortal agents could often accomplish what their own terrible presence made impossible. Fear, they discovered, was a tool that could be wielded with precision, applied in just the right measure to achieve the desired result. In the deep places of the world, they began to gather ancient knowledge, seeking out the lore of the elder days and the secrets of the rings of power. Libraries burned in their wake, not from malice, but from necessity, for knowledge was power, and power shared was power diminished. They became collectors of secrets, hoarders of forbidden wisdom, their minds vast repositories of dark learning that would serve their master when the time came for his final revelation to the world. As Sauron's power grew and he began to take shape once more in Barad-dûr, the Nine felt the pull of his presence like a great bell tolling in the depths of their being. They began to gather once more in Mordor, drawn by bonds that had only grown stronger during their years of separation. The Black Land welcomed them home, like a mother embracing her lost children, and in its volcanic fires and poisoned streams, they found a reflection of their own transformed nature. The reunion of the Nine in Mordor was not marked by any ceremony or recognition, for such mortal customs had long since become meaningless to them. They simply materialized from the shadows of different paths, their forms coalescing in the great fortress like smoke drawn to flame. Each had spent the intervening years differently, pursuing their own dark purposes in service to their master's greater design. Yet their shared consciousness had never truly been broken. Through the connection forged by their rings, they had remained aware of one another's movements, a distant awareness like the memory of a half-forgotten dream that surfaces unbidden in moments of quiet contemplation. The Witch King had wandered the northern wastes, learning the ways of ice and storm, discovering how fear could be cultivated in the long darkness of winter nights when hope seemed most fragile. Another had walked the paths of the dead in the paths of the dead, communing with spirits that had refused the call to rest, understanding how guilt could chain a soul more securely than any physical bond. A third had dwelt among the hills of Rune, watching the movements of the Easterlings and learning the subtle art of turning brother against brother through whispered words and planted doubts. Each had become a scholar of suffering in their own particular way, gathering expertise that would serve the coming darkness. In the deepest chambers of Barad-dûr, where the very stones seemed to pulse with malevolent life, Sauron received his servants with the satisfaction of a craftsman examining tools that had been perfectly honed. The Dark Lord had grown in power and presence since their last gathering, his will now strong enough to maintain physical form for extended periods, though he had not yet dared to fully manifest in the world. The Nine knelt before him, not from any lingering memory of mortal courtesy, but because his presence pressed down upon them like the weight of mountains, a force so overwhelming that even their transformed nature could not stand upright beneath it. He spoke to them without words, his thoughts flowing directly into their minds, with the clarity of crystal and the heat of molten metal. The time of hiding was drawing to a close, he told them, though the final revelation was still years away. The world had grown complacent in the long peace. The vigilance of the wise had relaxed, and the memory of ancient evils had faded into legend and myth. It was time to begin the great work of preparation, to set in motion the wheels that would grind the free peoples into dust when the moment of destiny arrived. The Nine received their new instructions with the perfect obedience that had been bred into their very essence. They were to be his eyes and ears throughout Middle-earth, his invisible hands reaching into every corner where resistance might grow or hope might take root. But their role was to be more subtle now than in the crude campaigns of earlier years. They were not to reveal themselves unless absolutely necessary, not to strike until the moment was perfectly chosen. They had become instruments of such refinement that even the slightest discord would ruin the symphony their master was composing. Some were sent to the great cities of men, where they walked among the living, wearing faces borrowed from the recently dead, their presence known only as a vague unease that settled over councils and marketplaces like morning fog. They learned the rhythms of mortal life with the patience of scholars, understanding how hope and fear ebbed and flowed through populations like tides, how a word spoken in the right ear at the right moment could change the course of kingdoms. They became masters of the long game, planting seeds of discord that would not bloom for decades. cultivating doubts that would fester in the minds of leaders until the moment came to harvest despair. Others returned to the wild places, the forgotten corners of the world where ancient powers still lingered and old alliances might be renewed. In the depths of Mirkwood, now growing ever darker under the shadow of Dol Guldur, they communed with spiders whose poison could corrupt the mind as well as the body. In the misty mountains, they spoke with the great goblins in their deep halls, promising them rich plunder and the chance to feast on the flesh of their enemies when the war came. They walked among the wolves in winter, teaching them new songs of hunger that would echo in the hearts of their descendants for generations to come. The years flowed by like a dark river, carrying Middle-earth inexorably toward the destiny that Sauron had foreseen. The Nine moved through this time like shadows cast by a sun that had not yet risen. Their influence felt everywhere, but their presence acknowledged nowhere. They had learned the art of working through intermediaries so perfectly that entire kingdoms could be toppled without a single witness ever glimpsing their true forms. A merchant's caravan would disappear on a lonely road, leaving behind only whispered rumors of black riders seen in the distance. A wise counselor would begin offering advice that seemed reasonable, but led inevitably toward ruin, his words carrying a subtle poison that none could identify, but all could feel. In the libraries of Minas Tirith, ancient texts began to vanish, not stolen but simply fading from memory, as if they had never existed. The lore of the elder days grew dim in the minds of even the most learned, replaced by newer knowledge that seemed more practical, but was shot through with subtle falsehoods. The Nine had become editors of history itself, carefully excising the passages that might warn of coming danger, while leaving intact those that would foster complacency and false confidence. The Shire felt their influence as a gradual cooling of the seasons, winters that lasted slightly longer than they should, summers that seemed less bright than those remembered from childhood. The Hobbits, in their simple contentment, noticed these changes no more than fish. Noticed the gradual warming of water in a pot set over a slow flame. Their ancient connections to the wider world grew ever more tenuous, their knowledge of distant lands fading into half-remembered tales told by the fireside on winter nights. Even in Rivendell and Lothlorien, where the power of the Three Rings still held sway, a subtle shadow began to creep across the edges of perception. The Elves felt it as a dimming of starlight, a lessening of the music that had always flowed through their immortal lives. They knew that something was stirring in the darkness, but the nature of the threat remained hidden from even their ancient wisdom. The Nine had learned to work around the barriers of elvish foresight, approaching their goals by such indirect paths that even those gifted with prophetic vision could see only fragments of the approaching storm. In Isengard, Saruman felt the touch of their influence as a gradual shift in his own thoughts. His noble desire to study and understand the enemy slowly transforming into a fascination that bordered on admiration. The White Wizard began to see the logic in Sauron's methods, the efficiency of his organization, the inevitability of his victory. These thoughts came to him in moments of quiet contemplation, seeming to arise from his own reasoning rather than from any external source. He began to correspond with agents he believed served his own purposes, never realizing that every letter, every meeting, every small compromise was drawing him deeper into a web that had been years in the weaving. The Nine watched all of this unfold, with the satisfaction of gardeners tending a crop that was finally approaching harvest. They had learned patience beyond mortal comprehension, the ability to work toward goals that lay decades in the future, with the same dedication that a man might show in planning his next meal. Time had become their ally, rather than their enemy, each passing year strengthening the foundations of despair they had so carefully laid throughout Middle-earth. Soon, they knew, their master would call them to more direct action, and when that moment came, they would be ready to serve with a perfection that had been centuries in the making. As the years flowed onward, like a dark river approaching its delta, the influence of the Nine spread through channels both subtle and profound, touching lives in ways that seemed almost natural in their gradual progression. In the great city of Minas Tirith, the ruling stewards found themselves facing challenges that grew more complex with each passing generation. The bloodline that had once produced leaders of remarkable wisdom and strength began to show signs of a curious malaise, not weakness precisely, but a creeping tendency toward isolation and melancholy that seemed to deepen with each heir who took up the white rod of office. The stewards still performed their duties with diligence, still maintained the defences of Gondor, and kept watch over Mordor's borders. But there was a quality of resignation in their vigilance now, as though they were merely delaying an inevitable conclusion, rather than actively working toward victory over the darkness. This shift in spirit did not happen overnight, nor did it manifest in any single dramatic moment that historians might later point to as the beginning of decline. Instead, it crept into the very stones of the citadel, like water seeping through ancient mortar, carried on whispers between servants, reflected in the increasingly formal distance that grew between the stewards and their people. The guards who walked the walls of Minas Tirith began to look eastward, with expressions that held more dread than defiance. And though they could not have explained why, many found themselves avoiding the higher ramparts during the darkest hours before dawn, when shadows seemed to move with purpose among the distant peaks of the Efelduath. In the archives deep beneath the citadel, scholars who had once worked with enthusiasm to preserve the lore and wisdom of ancient days found their passion dimming like candles burning low. Manuscripts that had been copied and recopied for generations began to contain small errors, subtle changes in meaning that accumulated over time like sediment in a slow-moving stream. The histories of great victories grew shorter in their retelling, while accounts of defeats and disasters seemed to expand, taking on a weight and prominence that gradually shifted the entire character of Gondor's recorded memory. Those who noticed these changes attributed them to the natural evolution of scholarship, the inevitable process by which stories change in the telling, never suspecting that certain influences moved through the halls of learning like an invisible tide, encouraging some thoughts while discouraging others. The Nazgûl understood that the corruption of hope was far more valuable than any military victory could ever be. A people who believed in their ultimate defeat would fight with less conviction when the moment of crisis finally arrived, would make crucial decisions based on fear rather than courage, would seek accommodation with evil rather than stand firm against it. This corruption of spirit was their masterwork, more subtle than the forging of any ring of power, more devastating than the raising of any army. They worked like master poisoners, introducing their influence in doses so small that no single exposure would cause alarm. Yet each contact prepared the ground for the next, building toward a moment when resistance would seem not merely difficult but utterly pointless. The rangers who rode the borders of Gondor began to report strange encounters in the wild lands, meetings with travelers who seemed ordinary enough in daylight, but left behind an inexplicable sense of unease that lingered for days after their passing. These wanderers always had reasonable explanations for their presence, plausible destinations and believable stories, yet something in their manner suggested depths that ordinary merchants or pilgrims should not possess. They asked questions that seemed innocent on the surface, but probed with curious precision into matters of defense and morale, the movement of supplies, and the disposition of troops. When rangers attempted to follow these suspicious travelers, they found their quarry had vanished as completely as smoke on a clear day, leaving behind no trace save hoofprints that led to rocky ground where all tracks disappeared. In the kingdom of Rohan, similar influences worked their slow corruption through different channels, adapted to the particular character and customs of the horse lords. The great mead halls that had once echoed with songs celebrating the valor of riders and the speed of their mounts began to feature darker ballads, tales of horses that stumbled at crucial moments, of riders who lost their way in familiar country, of battles won at such terrible cost that victory felt indistinguishable from defeat. The court musicians who composed these songs believed they were simply reflecting the natural melancholy that comes with the passage of time and the memory of those who had fallen in service to their people, never realizing that their inspiration was being guided by influences that moved through dreams and half-remembered conversations, like threads in a tapestry too large for any single weaver to perceive in its entirety. The breeding of horses, that most sacred art among the Rohirrim, began to show subtle changes as well. The great stallions and mares that had once produced foals of legendary speed and endurance still gave birth to fine horses, but there was a quality missing from the new generations, a spark of wildness and joy that had once made the horses of Rohan as famous as their riders. The horse masters attributed this to the natural cycles of bloodlines, the inevitable need to introduce new stock from distant lands, but the changes went deeper than genetics could explain. The very spirit of the herds seemed to be slowly dimming, as though some essential connection between horse and rider, between the people and the grasslands that sustained them, was being gradually severed by influences too subtle to detect, yet too persistent to ignore. Even in the Shire, that haven of simple contentment and rustic peace, the long influence of the Nine began to manifest in ways that the Hobbits themselves would have found difficult to articulate. The great families that had long provided leadership for the Four Farthings began to produce heirs who were competent enough in their duties, but seemed to lack the spark of genuine care for their neighbours that had once characterized Hobbit society. Disputes over property boundaries, once settled with good-natured compromise, and perhaps a shared pint at the local inn, began to drag on for months or even years, creating divisions between families that had been friends for generations. The bounders who patrolled the borders of the Shire found themselves turning away an increasing number of strange folk seeking entry, wanderers whose papers seemed to be in order, but whose presence somehow felt wrong in ways that defied explanation. The seasonal festivals that had once brought such joy to Hobbit communities began to feel more like obligations than celebrations, observed out of custom rather than genuine enthusiasm. The harvest dances seemed less spirited, the midsummer bonfires burned less brightly, and even the beloved tradition of birthday parties began to take on a perfunctory quality that left participants feeling oddly empty, despite having followed all the proper forms. Children who had once spent their days in carefree exploration of woods and streams found themselves drawn instead to indoor pursuits, developing an unusual fascination with old books that told dark tales from distant lands, stories that previous generations of young hobbits would have found too frightening or simply too foreign to hold their interest. The influence of the Nazgûl worked like a slow poison through all the channels of communication and connection that bound the free peoples together. Traders who had once carried news and gossip along with their goods began to share different kinds of stories, tales that emphasized the growing dangers of travel, the increasing unreliability of old alliances, the wisdom of keeping to oneself rather than becoming entangled in the affairs of distant kingdoms. These merchants were not conscious agents of any dark purpose, merely ordinary folk responding to the subtle pressures of a world that seemed to be growing more dangerous and unpredictable with each passing season. Yet their influence spread like ripples from stones cast into still water, carrying doubt and isolation to communities that had once thrived on connection and mutual support. Through all of these slow changes, the Nine themselves remained largely invisible, their physical forms reserved for missions that required their direct intervention. They had learned that their mere presence, even when hidden, could accelerate the processes of corruption they sought to encourage. But they had also discovered that too much direct involvement could trigger the very resistance they hoped to avoid. The free peoples still possessed individuals of remarkable perception and strength, elves whose memories reached back to the elder days, wizards whose power could challenge even the Nazgûl when properly focused, men and women of such natural nobility that the sight of true evil could awaken in them a courage that no amount of gradual corruption could overcome. The Nine had learned to work around such individuals rather than confronting them directly, undermining the foundations of the societies that supported them, while leaving the heroes themselves untouched, until the moment when their isolation would make them vulnerable to more direct assault. As the shadow of their influence spread across Middle-earth, like the slow advance of winter twilight, the Nazgûl prepared for the time when their master would emerge from his fortress and call them to open war. They had spent centuries learning the weaknesses of their enemies, mapping every path by which corruption could enter the hearts of the free peoples, identifying every leader whose fall would create chaos, every alliance whose breaking would leave former friends isolated and vulnerable. When that moment came, they would be ready to serve with a perfection that had been ages in the making, their understanding of their enemies' hearts as complete as their mastery of fear itself. The long preparation had taught the Nine that victory in war was not merely a matter of armies clashing on battlefields, but of ensuring that when those armies finally met, one side would already be weakened by doubt, divided by mistrust, and demoralized by the gradual erosion of everything they had once believed unshakable. This understanding guided their efforts as they continued their patient work through the final centuries before their master's return, each of them developing particular expertise in the arts of corruption that best suited their ancient nature and the regions they haunted. The Witch King had become the master of political manipulation, his influence seeping through the courts and councils of kingdoms where men still ruled themselves. His whispered suggestions planted in the minds of advisors who never suspected that their growing cynicism and ambition were being carefully nurtured by an intelligence far older and more malevolent than any mortal schemer. He had learned to identify the fault lines that ran through every human society, the places where envy and pride and fear of change could be leveraged to create the kind of internal strife that would consume a kingdom's strength long before any external enemy appeared at its borders. His brother Nazgûl had each found their own specializations in this great work of preparation, some focusing on the corruption of trade and commerce, others on the slow poisoning of religious and philosophical traditions that had once provided moral guidance to entire peoples. One among them had become particularly skilled at identifying and corrupting the natural leaders who might otherwise rally resistance when darkness finally showed itself openly, working to ensure that such individuals would either be eliminated through seemingly natural political processes or would find themselves so isolated and discredited that their voices would carry no weight when the time of crisis arrived. Another had devoted centuries to the patient work of encouraging warfare between the free peoples themselves, not the dramatic conflicts that would draw the attention of the wise, but the smaller disputes and border skirmishes that would gradually exhaust resources and create lasting resentments between communities that should have stood together against the true enemy. Through all of this careful preparation, the Nine maintained their connection to the Palantir of Minas Ithil, that seeing stone which had become their window into the broader movements of Middle-earth and their means of coordination across vast distances. The stone had been corrupted along with the tower that housed it, its clear sight twisted to serve the purposes of the shadow, yet it remained a powerful tool for those who knew how to use it without being consumed by its malice. Through its dark crystal, the Nazgûl could observe the movements of their enemies, track the slow success of their own efforts at corruption, and coordinate their activities with a precision that would have been impossible through any mundane means of communication. The Palantir showed them not only what was happening in distant places, but what was likely to happen, the patterns of cause and effect that their centuries of patient work had set in motion across the length and breadth of Middle-earth. As the Third Age drew toward its close, the Nine began to sense changes in the world that spoke of their masters approaching return to active power. The signs were subtle at first, felt more than seen, a gradual shift in the spiritual atmosphere of Middle-earth that those sensitive to such things experienced as a growing unease, a sense that some great change was approaching, though its nature remained hidden. The Nazgûl felt these stirrings more clearly than any other beings, their connection to the Dark Lord allowing them to perceive the first tentative movements of his will as he began to gather his strength in the depths of Mount Doom. They recognized in these signs the approach of the time when their long preparation would finally bear fruit, when the seeds of corruption they had planted so carefully would sprout into the chaos and division that would make Middle-earth ripe for conquest. The return of their master's active consciousness brought with it new instructions and new purposes, though these came not as direct commands, but as subtle influences on their own thoughts and desires, guidance that felt like their own insights and decisions even as it shaped their actions toward ends that served the greater design. They began to move more openly now, though still with the caution that centuries of careful work had taught them, emerging from the deepest shadows to take more direct action in preparing for the war that was to come. The Witch King left his fortress in the north and began the conquest of Minas Ithil, that great city of Gondor that commanded the passes of the Duath, while his fellow Nazgûl spread across Middle-earth to begin the final phase of their long campaign of preparation. The siege and fall of Minas Ithil marked a turning point in the Shadow's advance, the first open move in what would become the War of the Last Alliance, though few recognized it as such at the time. The city's capture gave the Nazgûl a stronghold in the very heart of Gondor's defences, a base from which they could project their power into the surrounding lands while maintaining their connection to Mordor through the captured Palantir. More importantly, it demonstrated to the free peoples that the darkness they had sensed growing in the world was not merely a matter of strange reports and troubling rumours, but a real and immediate threat that could strike at the mightiest of their strongholds. Yet even in this moment of open warfare, the Nine continued to employ the subtle arts they had perfected over the centuries, using the terror of Minas Ithil's fall to accelerate the processes of despair and division they had been nurturing for so long. The corruption of Minas Ithil into Minas Morgul became perhaps the greatest monument to their mastery of spiritual poison, the transformation of a city of light and learning into a fortress of dread and sorcery that would stand as a permanent wound in the heart of Gondor. The process was not accomplished through mere destruction and rebuilding, but through a fundamental alteration of the city's essential nature, a corruption so complete that every stone and timber became infused with malice, every tower and wall reshaped to serve purposes that were the antithesis of everything the city had once represented. This transformation served both practical and symbolic purposes, providing the Nazgûl with a stronghold perfectly suited to their nature, while simultaneously demonstrating to all who beheld it the fate that awaited any who opposed the growing darkness. From their new fortress, the Nine could extend their influence throughout the lands of Gondor and beyond, their mere presence in Minas Morgul serving as a constant source of dread that weakened the resolve of their enemies, even when no direct action was taken against them. The city became a beacon of malice that could be felt by sensitive souls across hundreds of miles, its corruption seeping into the dreams of men and elves alike, carrying whispers of despair and defeat that prepared the ground for future conquest. Even the bravest warriors found their courage tested by the knowledge that such a place existed so close to their own lands, while common folk began to speak of the growing darkness, not as a distant threat, but as an immediate presence that might at any moment reach out to claim them as well. The years that followed the establishment of Minas Morgul witnessed the Nazgûl perfecting their new methods of warfare, learning to blend the ancient subtleties of their craft with the more direct applications of terror and force. From their tower fortress, they could observe the patterns of life across Ithilien and the surrounding lands, studying the rhythms of trade and travel, the cycles of planting and harvest, the movements of patrols and messengers that connected the scattered settlements of Gondor. This knowledge allowed them to strike with devastating precision, not merely at military targets, but at the very foundations of civilized life. disrupting the delicate networks of communication and commerce that held the kingdom together. They learned to time their raids to coincide with moments of particular vulnerability, striking at harvest festivals when communities gathered in celebration, attacking trading caravans at river crossings where escape would be most difficult, pursuing fleeing refugees along roads they had secretly blocked days earlier. Yet even these more overt acts of war retained the psychological sophistication that had always marked their approach, each attack carefully designed to spread stories that would magnify its impact far beyond the immediate victims. The Nazgûl understood that the true battlefield was not the physical landscape of Middle-earth, but the realm of hope and despair that existed within the hearts of those who opposed them. Each successful raid became the seed of dozens of rumors. Each narrow escape by their enemies transformed into a tale of supernatural pursuit that grew more terrifying with each retelling. They cultivated an aura of inevitability around their presence, allowing some witnesses to survive their attacks specifically so that word would spread of their terrible efficiency, while simultaneously ensuring that these survivors carried with them wounds of spirit that would never fully heal. The fell beasts they had learned to master became symbols of this new phase of their existence, creatures of such alien malice that their very appearance in the skies above peaceful settlements was enough to send entire populations fleeing in panic. These winged servants of darkness were not merely mounts, but extensions of the Nazgûl's own nature, creatures bred in the pits of Mordor to embody the same fusion of physical terror and spiritual corruption that their masters had perfected over the long centuries. As the Third Age drew toward its close, the Nine found themselves preparing for what they sensed would be a final confrontation with the forces of light, a culmination of all the patient work they had undertaken since their first binding to the Rings of Power. The Dark Lord's plans were reaching fruition, and the Nazgûl understood that their role in the coming conflict would be both crucial and perilous. For success would mean the completion of their long service, while failure might bring about their final destruction. They had grown beyond their original mortal limitations in ways their first masters could never have anticipated, becoming entities of such focused malevolence that they existed as much in the realm of spirit as in the physical world. This evolution had granted them powers that transcended the merely supernatural, allowing them to perceive the currents of fate and possibility that flowed through the world, to sense the movements of their enemies across vast distances, and to strike at the very souls of those who opposed them. The hunt for the ring-bearer became the ultimate expression of everything the Nazgûl had learned during their long existence, combining their mastery of fear and pursuit with their deep understanding of the spiritual forces that governed Middle-earth. They could sense the presence of the One Ring like a wound in the fabric of reality, its power calling to them across leagues of wilderness and stone. Yet this very sensitivity to the ring's presence also made them vulnerable in ways they had not experienced since their original transformation. For the ring's power was of the same nature as their own, and its proximity awakened hungers and compulsions that threatened to overwhelm even their ancient discipline. The pursuit became a test not only of their abilities, but of their fundamental nature, forcing them to balance their desire to reclaim their master's lost treasure against the tactical necessities of the hunt itself. Throughout this final phase of their existence, the Nazgûl demonstrated the full extent of their evolution, from the mortal kings they had once been. They had learned to coordinate their efforts with a precision that spoke of minds linked by bonds deeper than mere communication, moving across the landscape of Middle-earth like the fingers of a single vast hand. Their ability to inspire terror had been refined to such a degree that they could paralyze enemies with fear while leaving allies untouched, could drive armies to flight with nothing more than their presence while preserving specific individuals for capture or interrogation. They had mastered the art of existing simultaneously in multiple realms, walking the paths between the seen and unseen worlds, with an ease that allowed them to appear and disappear like shadows, to pass through barriers that would stop physical beings, and to strike at their enemies through dreams and visions, as well as sword and flame. The final confrontation at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields revealed both the heights of their power and the limitations that had always constrained them, for despite centuries of growth and evolution, they remained bound by the fundamental nature of their transformation. They were creatures of domination and fear, masters of corruption and despair, but they had sacrificed their capacity for the creative forces that ultimately determined the fate of Middle-earth. Their defeat came not through superior force of arms, but through the intervention of prophecy and the courage of those who had resisted their influence, demonstrating that even the most perfectly crafted instruments of darkness could be overcome by the light they had sought to extinguish. Yet even in their destruction, the Nazgûl left behind a legacy that would shape the memory of Middle-earth for ages to come, their story serving as both warning and testament to the prices of power and the possibilities of corruption that lay dormant within even the noblest of hearts. Their fall, sudden and absolute with the destruction of the One Ring, was not merely an end, but a final, poignant chapter in a story that began millennia before the dawn of the Fourth Age, when the ring was unmade in the fires of Mount Doom. The very essence of their being, inextricably linked to its power, was ripped asunder. It was not a physical death in the traditional sense, for they had long since shed the trappings of mortality. Instead, it was an unbinding, a dissolution back into the nothingness from which Sauron had drawn them. The black breath, which had sustained their unnatural existence and spread terror, evaporated, leaving behind only the lingering chill of its absence. Their spectral forms, once so menacing and tangible in their unreality, simply ceased to be. The screeching cries, which had echoed across the lands, were silenced forever, leaving only the sound of the wind, now unburdened by their dread presence. This final, ultimate undoing was a stark reminder of the nature of their power, borrowed, dependent, and ultimately unsustainable without its source. They were instruments, honed to perfection, but instruments nonetheless. And when the hand that wielded them was severed, the instruments too shattered. Yet, even in their annihilation, there lingered a profound sense of their impact, a deep scar upon the psyche of Middle-earth. For centuries, they had been the embodiment of fear, the shadowy hand of Sauron reaching out to crush hope and spread despair. Their memory would not fade quickly, but would rather linger in the tales told around hearths, in the hushed whispers of ancient lore, serving as a perpetual cautionary tale. The Nazgûl, then, were more than just servants. They were a living testament to the corrupting influence of power, a stark illustration of how the noblest intentions when twisted and amplified by dark forces, could lead to monstrous outcomes. Their journey from kings to wraiths was a slow, insidious process, each year and each deed chipping away at their humanity and binding them ever more tightly to their master's will. Their story is a tragedy not just of individuals, but of an entire era, a reflection of the grand sweep of history and the relentless struggle between light and shadow. Consider their origins once more. These mighty kings of old, perhaps men of great wisdom, valor, or even benevolence in their initial reigns. What were their kingdoms like? What noble aspirations might have guided their early decisions? We can only speculate, for the mists of time have long since obscured the details of their mortal lives. But it is within the realm of possibility, perhaps even probability, that they were figures of immense stature in their respective lands. They would have been leaders, protectors, and possibly even revered figures. The rings of power offered by Sauron in his fair guise as Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, would have appealed to their deepest desires. For power, yes, but perhaps also for the ability to better protect their people, to extend their lives, to enhance their wisdom, or to secure their legacies. The tragedy truly begins with the acceptance of these gifts, for the rings were not merely objects of power, but instruments of dominion, crafted with the express purpose of subjugating the wills of those who wore them. The process of their transformation was gradual, insidious, a slow erosion of self. It was a process that unfolded over centuries, not days or weeks. Initially, they would have experienced an amplification of their innate abilities, a heightened perception, an extended lifespan, and perhaps even a subtle influence over the minds of others. These initial boons would have been intoxicating, confirming their belief in the ring's benevolent nature, cementing their loyalty to their mysterious benefactor. But as the centuries wore on, the true nature of the rings would slowly assert itself. The extended life would begin to feel less like a blessing and more like a curse, as the world of the living slowly receded from their grasp. Their physical forms would become more indistinct, their senses less attuned to the vibrant reality of Middle-earth, and more to the shadowy, unseen world that the rings allowed them to perceive. The memories of their mortal lives, their families, their kingdoms, their very names would begin to fade, replaced by an ever-growing dependency on the ring's power and by extension on Sauron himself. Their wills, once their own, would slowly intertwine with his, until they became mere extensions of his dark purpose. The loss of their names is particularly poignant. A name, in many cultures, carries a weight of identity, history, and lineage. To lose one's name is to lose a fundamental part of oneself. For the Nazgûl, this loss was not merely symbolic. It was a reflection of the complete eradication of their individual identities. They became known only by their titles: the Witch King of Angmar, Khamûl, the Easterling, and the nameless others. Each an echo of their origin, but stripped of the personal touch that defines a living being. They became, in essence, archetypes of dread, embodying the various aspects of Sauron's dominion. The Witch King, for instance, became the embodiment of military might and cruel leadership. His dominion over Angmar, his relentless war against Arnor, and his ultimate role as the captain of Sauron's armies, all speak to a personality that, even in its corrupted state, retained a formidable capacity for strategy and command. His defiance of prophecy, his belief in his own invincibility, and his final, desperate stand at the Pelennor Fields all underscore a tragic figure who, even as a wraith, possessed a certain dark grandeur. Khamûl, often referred to as the Shadow of the East, represents a different facet of their power. His heightened sensitivity to the presence of the One Ring, his role as a relentless tracker, and his swift pursuit of Frodo in the Shire highlight a more subtle, pervasive form of terror. He was the silent hunter, the one who could feel the pulse of the ring across vast distances, a terrifying manifestation of Sauron's omnipresent gaze. The other seven, though less individually defined in the surviving lore, undoubtedly contributed their own unique strengths to the collective power of the Nazgûl. Perhaps one was a master of dark sorcery, another a cunning infiltrator, yet another a brute force of destruction. Together, they formed a cohesive unit, a perfectly synchronized instrument of terror, each complementing the other's abilities and weaknesses, all bound by the singular will of their master. Their existence in both the seen and unseen worlds is a crucial aspect of their dread. To the ordinary eyes of mortals, they often appeared as hooded riders, black figures on black steeds, their forms indistinct and their voices a chilling shriek. But to those who possessed a heightened awareness, or who were themselves touched by the unseen, such as Frodo when he wore the ring, they were revealed in their true, spectral horror, shadowy figures with burning eyes, wielding weapons of cold fear. This duality allowed them to bypass physical barriers, to strike at the minds and spirits of their victims, and to instill a pervasive sense of dread that went beyond mere physical threat. It was a terror that seeped into the very soul, corroding courage and inspiring despair. The very air around them became oppressive, their black breath a tangible manifestation of their corrupting influence. This malady, which afflicted those who came into prolonged contact with them, was not merely a sickness of the body, but a draining of the spirit, a creeping despair that could lead to madness and death. It was a subtle weapon, a slow poison that mirrored the gradual corruption they themselves had undergone. Their mounts, too, deserve consideration. The black horses, imbued with a portion of their master's unnatural energy, were swift and tireless, capable of traversing vast distances without rest. They were not mere beasts, but extensions of the Nazgûl's will, their own forms twisted and corrupted by the proximity of such dark power. And later, the fell beasts, ancient winged horrors drawn from the forgotten corners of the world, provided them with an even greater reach, allowing them to survey vast stretches of land, to instill terror from the skies, and to engage in aerial combat. These creatures, too, were not simply animals. They were living embodiments of the dread that the Nazgûl commanded, their very presence a harbinger of doom. The centuries of their service to Sauron were filled with countless acts of cruelty and destruction. They were at the forefront of his wars, leading his armies, inspiring fear in his enemies, and enforcing his will across Middle-earth. They witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, the ebb and flow of power, and through it all, they remained constant, unwavering in their loyalty, relentless in their pursuit of his goals. Their existence was a chronicle of Middle-earth's suffering, a living history of the darkness that Sauron sought to impose upon the world. Yet despite their immense power and the terror they inspired, they were ultimately bound by limitations. They could not operate freely in strong daylight, for the sun was anathema to their spectral forms, forcing them into the shadows or to travel primarily at night. their power was also diminished in the presence of strong, untainted goodness, or by the courage of those who defied them. They were creatures of fear, and when that fear was overcome, their influence waned. This inherent vulnerability, a remnant of their original transformation, ultimately played a role in their undoing. Their final, desperate charge at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, their cries echoing across the field of death, was a culmination of all their power and all their dread. The Witch King's direct challenge to Gandalf, his seemingly invincible presence, and his eventual defeat at the hands of Eowyn and Merry represent a pivotal moment not just in the War of the Ring, but in the long, tragic history of the Nazgûl themselves. It was a moment where prophecy intertwined with courage, where the seemingly insurmountable power of darkness was broken by the unexpected and the brave. The destruction of the One Ring, the source of their power and their unnatural life, brought about their ultimate oblivion. It was an end that was both fitting and inevitable, for their existence was inextricably linked to the ring's continued presence. With its unmaking, they were unmade, their screams of agony echoing one last time across the ravaged lands before fading into eternal silence. The memory of the Nazgûl would remain, a dark stain on the tapestry of Middle-earth's history, but their tangible presence, their chilling influence, was gone forever. Their story, then, is not merely a tale of terror, but a profound exploration of the nature of power, corruption, and the enduring strength of the spirit. It speaks to the terrible allure of extended life and dominion, and the ultimate price of surrendering one's identity and will to a greater, darker force. It reminds us that even the most powerful instruments of evil are ultimately dependent on their source, and that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, hope and courage can ultimately prevail. And now, as the echoes of their cries fade into the quiet night, let us drift deeper into the tranquility of stillness, allowing these ancient tales to gently guide us into the realms of dreams. For the tale of the Nazgûl is also a mirror, reflecting the subtle ways in which ambition can be twisted, and how the pursuit of what seems like an advantage can lead to an unimaginable downfall. They were kings and sorcerers in their own right, figures of considerable stature and influence in their own time, before the shadow of Sauron fell upon them. Imagine the kingdoms they ruled, the peoples they swayed, the knowledge they possessed. These were not common men, but individuals of power and renown, whose very eminence made them susceptible to the ring's insidious promise. The ring wraiths, in their spectral existence, embody the ultimate loss of self, a chilling testament to the dangers of unchecked desire for immortality and power. They sought to transcend the limitations of mortal life, to escape the inevitable decay of time, and in doing so, they became something far worse than mortal. They became slaves, bound to the will of another, their once proud identities eroded into mere extensions of Sauron's malice. Their transformation was not instantaneous, but a gradual, insidious process. The rings of power, crafted by Sauron in secret and imbued with his own essence, were designed to ensnare. For the 9 kings of men, these rings offered a prolonged existence, heightened senses, and a mastery over lesser wills. At first, perhaps, they saw only the advantages, the ability to command, to foresee, to endure. They felt their power grow, their influence expand, and the whispers of mortality recede. But with each passing year, with each use of the ring, the bond tightened. The physical world began to recede, becoming a dim perception, while the unseen world, the realm of spirits and shadows, became increasingly real to them. Their bodies, though seemingly preserved, became brittle, transparent, and ultimately invisible to mortal eyes. Their minds, once sharp and independent, became clouded, their thoughts slowly replaced by the dark will of their master. This slow, agonizing descent into spectral servitude is one of the most tragic aspects of their story. They were not born evil, but became so through a series of choices, each one leading them further down a path from which there was no return. The rings they wore, symbols of their power, became their shackles. The extended life they craved became an endless torment, a ceaseless existence devoid of joy, love, or free will. They became instruments of fear, their very presence spreading dread and despair. Yet they themselves were prisoners of an even greater terror, the overwhelming, dominating power of Sauron. The Witch King of Angmar, their captain, stands as the most prominent example of this tragic trajectory. Once a great king of men, his identity and kingdom were utterly consumed by the shadow he embraced. His deeds in the north, his establishment of Angmar, and his relentless war against the divided kingdoms of Arnor are a testament to his power, even before he fully became the spectral terror of the Third Age. He was a master of dark sorcery, a formidable warrior, and a cunning strategist. Yet even he, the most powerful of the Nazgûl, was ultimately a slave. His existence was defined by Sauron's command, his aspirations limited to serving his master's dark designs. His famous declaration that "no living man may hinder me" was not a boast born of inherent invincibility, but a prophecy subtly woven into the fabric of Middle-earth by the Valar and their servants, a limitation placed upon a creature who had defied the natural order. It highlighted his vulnerability to the unexpected, to the courage of a woman and a hobbit, an irony that would ultimately prove his undoing. The other 8 Nazgûl, though less individually defined in the annals of history, each contributed to the pervasive dread they inspired. We know little of their individual names or their kingdoms before their fall, a deliberate narrative choice that emphasizes their complete loss of personal identity. They became a collective force, a unified expression of Sauron's malice, their individual pasts swallowed by the overwhelming darkness of their present. Yet it is important to remember that each of them was once a man with hopes, dreams, and perhaps even virtues, before the lure of power corrupted them utterly. This transformation from living beings to wraiths serves as a powerful cautionary tale about the perils of succumbing to temptation, particularly when that temptation promises dominion and an escape from mortality. Their influence extended far beyond direct confrontation. The very idea of the Nazgûl, their unseen presence, their chilling shriek, served as a psychological weapon, eroding hope and fostering despair wherever they went. They were harbingers of doom, their black robes and hooded forms a visual representation of the encroaching darkness. They were agents of surveillance, their heightened senses in the unseen world, allowing them to perceive things hidden from mortal sight, making them expert trackers and relentless pursuers. Their ability to inspire terror was not merely a side effect of their power, but a deliberate strategy employed by Sauron, knowing that fear could cripple resistance as effectively as any army. The horses they rode, though seemingly mundane, were also instruments of their power. These were not ordinary steeds, but creatures of darkness, bred or corrupted to serve the Nazgûl. Their black coats, their fiery eyes, and their unnerving silence as they moved, all contributed to the aura of dread that surrounded their riders. And when these horses were lost, as they were at the ford of Bruinen, the Nazgûl were forced to seek new mounts, eventually taking to the skies upon their fell beasts. These ancient, winged creatures, products of a darker age, were a terrifying evolution of the Nazgûl's mode of transport. Their screeching cries, their bat-like wings, and their razor-sharp talons transformed the Nazgûl into aerial predators, adding a new dimension to their already formidable threat. The image of the Nazgûl soaring above the battlefields of the Pelennor, casting their shadow over the struggling armies, is one of the most iconic and terrifying in all of Tolkien's work. Their pursuit of the One Ring, a relentless hunt that spanned decades, culminating in their final, desperate search for Frodo Baggins, highlights their unwavering loyalty to Sauron and their singular purpose. The ring, for them, was not merely an object of immense power, but the key to their master's ultimate victory, and therefore their continued, albeit terrible, existence. They sensed its presence, felt its pull, and followed its trail with an unholy determination. Their every action, every shriek, every confrontation was aimed at recovering that which was lost, that which was essential for Sauron's complete dominion. The encounters with the Nazgûl are pivotal moments in the narrative, marking the growing threat of Sauron and the deepening peril faced by the Fellowship. From their pursuit of Frodo through the Shire, a terrifying introduction to their power, to the harrowing confrontation at Weathertop, where Frodo was wounded by the Witch King's Morgul blade. These moments underscore the desperate struggle against an ancient and relentless evil. The wound from the Morgul blade is a particularly potent example of their insidious power, a magical injury that threatened to turn Frodo into a wraith himself, slowly drawing him into the unseen world, much like the Nazgûl themselves. It was a mirror of their own transformation, a chilling reminder of the fate that awaited those who fell under their shadow. Even in their defeat, there is a certain grandeur, a tragic finality. The destruction of the One Ring, the very source of their being, brought about their end not with a battle, but with a sudden, agonizing dissolution. Their final screams, echoing across the plains of Gorgoroth, were not cries of defiance, but of pure, unadulterated torment, as their unnatural lives were violently torn from them. It was a release, perhaps, from their endless servitude, but a terrifying one, as their corrupted spirits were finally unmade. And so, the story of the Nazgûl serves as a monumental epic within the larger tapestry of Middle-earth. It is a narrative of temptation, of the slow erosion of identity, of unwavering servitude, and ultimately of the triumph of hope over despair. They are a constant reminder that even the greatest power, when wielded for evil, can ultimately be undone by courage, by sacrifice, and by the unexpected choices of those who dare to stand against the darkness. Their legacy is etched in the memory of Middle-earth, a chilling legend that speaks to the profound dangers of ambition, untempered by wisdom, and the ultimate futility of seeking immortality through unnatural means. Their tale, now settled into the quiet chambers of your mind, continues to resonate, a low hum of ancient dread that gently lulls you closer to the peaceful embrace of slumber. Let the echoes of their long-forgotten cries fade into the gentle rhythm of your breath, as you drift further into the serene depths of night, where dreams await to unfold their own quiet tales. As the last vestiges of their tormented existence dissipate into the ethereal winds of a conquered Mordor, we can trace their story back to its very beginnings, long before their descent into shadow, to the ancient days when they were not nameless terrors, but kings and sorcerers of men. Imagine, if you will, a time of burgeoning kingdoms and valiant rulers, a time when the power of men was on the rise, yet also a time when their hearts, though strong, were susceptible to the allure of greater might, of dominion that stretched beyond mortal bounds. In the second age of Middle-earth, a period marked by great struggles and the rise of Sauron, the Dark Lord, these 9 individuals were powerful men, renowned in their own right. Some were kings of vast realms, their names whispered with respect and fear across their lands. Others were sorcerers, delving into forbidden arts, seeking knowledge and power beyond the ken of ordinary mortals. They were figures of influence, of ambition, and crucially, of inherent, though perhaps dormant, pride. It was this very pride, this craving for power, that Sauron, in his cunning and malevolent wisdom, exploited. He understood the hearts of men, their desire for immortality, their yearning for control over their own destinies and the destinies of others. And so, he forged the rings of power, not just for the elves and the dwarves, but specifically for men, knowing that their susceptibility to corruption was far greater. 9 rings were given to men, each one a masterpiece of dark craft, imbued with a fraction of Sauron's own formidable will. These were not mere trinkets. They were instruments of control, designed to ensnare the minds of their wearers, to amplify their desires, and ultimately to bind them to the will of the One Ring, and thus to Sauron himself. The 9 kings and sorcerers, eager for the gifts promised, extended life, wealth, and power beyond measure, readily accepted these rings, and for a time they revelled in their newfound might. Their kingdoms prospered, their influence grew, and their lives stretched far beyond the natural span of mortal men. They became mighty rulers, great warriors, and feared sorcerers, their names echoing through the annals of the Second Age. Yet this power came with a terrible, insidious price, a gradual erosion of their very being. The rings, while granting them immense temporal power, also began to twist their minds, to corrupt their souls. The extended life they so craved became a torment, as their mortal bodies slowly withered, unable to sustain the unnatural vitality granted by the rings. They became increasingly bound to the unseen world, the realm of spirits and shadows, a world that was always present but hidden from mortal eyes. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, their physical forms began to fade. The light of their eyes dimmed, their voices became raspy, and their once vibrant visages grew gaunt and pale. Their identities, their memories of who they once were, began to blur and dissolve, replaced by a singular, consuming loyalty to the source of their power, Sauron. This transformation, this agonizing descent into shadow, was a process that spanned centuries. They did not become wraiths overnight, but rather their humanity was slowly leached away, like color from an ancient tapestry left too long in the sun. They became servants of the rings, and through the rings, servants of Sauron. They lost their physical bodies, becoming invisible to mortal eyes unless cloaked in darkness or in the presence of the One Ring itself. They became the Nazgûl, the ring wraiths, the most terrible and dreaded of Sauron's servants. Their very existence was a testament to Sauron's mastery of corruption, his ability to turn the noblest and most ambitious of men into his instruments of terror. They were the ultimate expression of his power, a living, breathing embodiment of his malevolent will. They felt no pain, no fear, save for the fear of Sauron himself. Their senses were heightened in the unseen world, allowing them to perceive things hidden from mortal sight. Yet they were blind to the vibrant beauty of the physical world they once inhabited. The Witch King of Angmar, their leader, was once a great lord of men, perhaps the most powerful among them. His name, lost to all but the deepest lore, once commanded respect and fear. But under the influence of his ring, he became a being of pure malevolence, a master of dark sorcery and a formidable warrior. He established the kingdom of Angmar, a bastion of evil in the northern reaches, where he waged war against the fragmented Dunedain kingdoms for centuries, ultimately bringing about their downfall. This act of systematic destruction, of wearing down the resistance of free peoples, is a hallmark of the Nazgûl's methods. They did not always rely on brute force. Often their greatest weapon was dread itself, the slow erosion of hope and courage. The other 8 Nazgûl, though less prominent in the grand narrative, were equally terrifying in their own right. Each was a formidable individual in his mortal life, and each was transformed into a creature of immense power and unwavering loyalty to Sauron. Their presence alone was enough to spread panic and despair, their very breath a chilling harbinger of doom. For centuries they served Sauron, their power waxing and waning with his. In the Second Age, when Sauron was at his height, they were his most potent agents, leading armies, sowing discord, and hunting down those who dared to defy the Dark Lord. They were instrumental in the downfall of Numenor, though they did not directly participate in its destruction, their influence having already permeated the hearts of its people, softening them for Sauron's ultimate manipulations. After Sauron's defeat in the War of the Last Alliance, when he was stripped of his physical form and the One Ring was taken from him, the Nazgûl were also weakened. They retreated into the shadows, their power diminished, awaiting the return of their master. For a long period, they were relatively dormant, lurking in the forgotten corners of the world, their existence a whispered legend, a ghost story to frighten children. But as the Third Age progressed and Sauron began to stir once more, slowly gathering his strength in Dol Guldur, the Nazgûl too began to re-emerge. They became the instruments of his resurgence, his eyes and ears in the world, seeking out the One Ring and preparing the way for his ultimate return. Their reappearance in the Third Age was a terrifying sign for the free peoples of Middle-earth. It signaled that the shadow was indeed lengthening, that the ancient evil was once again stirring. Their pursuit of the One Ring, their relentless hunt for Frodo Baggins, is one of the most iconic and terrifying sequences in the entire saga. Imagine the sheer dread of a hobbit, small and vulnerable, being pursued by these ancient powerful beings. Their ability to track by scent, their chilling cries, the very air around them charged with fear. These elements combine to create an atmosphere of palpable tension and terror. The mere sound of their fell beasts, the screeching of their mounts, was enough to send shivers down the spine of even the bravest warrior. Their methods were not always overt. They were masters of stealth and subterfuge, able to move unseen through the land, Their presence often only felt as a growing coldness, a creeping despair. They often worked through proxies, corrupting lesser men and creatures to do their bidding. But when they appeared in person, their power was undeniable and overwhelming. The encounter at Weathertop, as we briefly touched upon, is a pivotal moment that truly showcases their unholy power. The Witch King's Morgul blade, a weapon imbued with dark magic, was designed not merely to wound the body, but to corrupt the spirit. The shard left in Frodo's shoulder was a slow-acting poison, a magical affliction that would have inexorably drawn him into the unseen world, turning him into a wraith himself, a fate worse than death. It was a chilling echo of their own transformation, a reminder that their power was not just destructive, but also transformative in the most horrific sense. Their presence at the fords of Bruinen, though ultimately thwarted by the intervention of Glorfindel and the Flood, further cemented their reputation as relentless pursuers, beings that would stop at nothing to achieve their master's goals. Even when swept away by the raging waters, they were not truly defeated. Their spectral forms, though temporarily dispersed, would eventually coalesce again, their malice undiminished. The siege of Minas Tirith, the culminating battle of the War of the Ring, saw the Nazgûl unleashed in their full, terrifying glory. Mounted on their fell beasts, they became instruments of aerial terror, striking fear into the hearts of the defenders, their dark wings blotting out the sun. The Witch King, in particular, was a force of unparalleled destruction, his dark magic and his immense power causing widespread devastation. His confrontation with Gandalf, though brief, was a clash of titans, a moment where the very fate of Middle-earth hung in the balance. And then his final stand against Eowyn, the shield maiden of Rohan and Merry Brandybuck, a small hobbit armed with a blade forged in the ancient wars against Angmar. This moment, often celebrated as a triumph of courage over despair, also highlights a crucial weakness of the Nazgûl. Their ultimate defeat was not by a mighty warrior or a powerful wizard, but by those considered lesser, by individuals who defied expectations and found strength in unexpected places. The prophecy that no living man could slay the Witch King was fulfilled not by a loophole, but by the courage of a woman and a hobbit, proving that even the most ancient and powerful evils can be overcome by the unexpected. The destruction of the One Ring, the very object from which their power flowed, and to which their existence was tethered, marked their absolute end. It was not a battle won, but a systemic collapse. Their screeching, their final agonizing cries, were not just the death throes of powerful beings, but the unraveling of centuries of unnatural existence. It was the undoing of Sauron's grand design, and with it, the unmaking of his most terrible servants. Their story, in essence, is a profound cautionary tale. It speaks of the seductive allure of power, of the gradual erosion of self when one succumbs to evil, and of the ultimate futility of seeking immortality through unnatural means. They were once kings, once sorcerers, once men of great potential. But their ambition, unchecked by wisdom or morality, led them down a path of eternal servitude and unimaginable torment. They became nameless, faceless terrors, their humanity utterly consumed by the rings they so eagerly accepted. Yet, even in their terrifying nature, there is a certain tragic grandeur. They were beings of immense power and ancient malice, their legend woven into the very fabric of Middle-earth. Their existence served as a constant reminder of the ever-present threat of Sauron, and their ultimate downfall was a crucial step towards the healing of the world. Now, as the echoes of their dark history gently fade into the quietude of the night, allow these ancient tales to guide your thoughts. Let the whisper of their passing, the final fading note of their sorrowful cries, lull you deeper into a peaceful slumber. The struggle is over, the shadow recedes, and the world can rest once more. May your dreams be filled with quiet wonder, far from the reach of any lingering darkness, as you drift into the tranquil embrace of a restful night. The long journey through the annals of Middle-earth's darkest history has brought us to this tranquil point, a quiet harbour after sailing through seas of shadow and despair. We have traced the winding paths of the Nazgûl, from their origins as kings of men to their terrifying apotheosis as Sauron's most dreaded lieutenants, and finally to their ultimate dissolution. Their tale, as we have explored, is not merely one of evil and destruction, but also a profound exploration of human frailty, the corrupting influence of power, and the enduring strength found in unexpected corners of the world. Let us now linger a while longer on the nature of their power and its insidious grip, for understanding the Nazgûl is to understand a fundamental aspect of the shadow itself. The 9 rings, given to them by Sauron, were not merely trinkets of power. They were instruments of control designed to exploit the deepest desires of mortal men. For these kings, their ambition was likely for dominion, for a lasting legacy, for a conquest that would outlive their mortal span. Sauron, ever the master manipulator, offered them a perverse form of immortality, a prolonged existence that seemed, on the surface, to fulfill their deepest yearning. But this immortality came at a terrible price, one that stripped them of their very essence, transforming them into spectral beings bound to the will of their master. Imagine, if you will, the slow, imperceptible erosion of self. It wouldn't have been a sudden transformation, but a gradual fading, like a distant memory growing fainter with each passing age. Initially, perhaps they retained their kingly bearing, their individual personalities. They might have used their rings to achieve great feats, to conquer lands, to amass wealth and influence. But with each passing year, the rings would have drawn them further into the unseen world, blurring the lines between their mortal existence and the shadowy realm of spirits. Their physical bodies, once vibrant and strong, would have become increasingly insubstantial, their senses dulled to the joys and sorrows of the living world. The warmth of the sun, the scent of spring flowers, the laughter of children, these things would have become alien to them, replaced by the cold, sterile perceptions of the unseen. This passage into the unseen world is a crucial aspect of their being. While they could still interact with the physical world, their true power, their true existence, lay beyond the veil of normal perception. This is why Frodo, wearing the One Ring, could see them in their true, terrifying forms, glowing with a cold light, their ancient crowns upon their spectral heads. For others, they were cloaked figures, their faces hidden, their voices a chilling whisper. This duality, this simultaneous presence in both worlds, made them incredibly potent and terrifying. They were not merely physical threats. They were also psychological ones, tapping into the primordial fears of the unknown, the unseen, the things that lurk just beyond the periphery of our understanding. Their dependency on Sauron was absolute. He was the source of their power, the anchor of their unnatural existence. Without him, their rings would have been inert, their spectral forms dissolved into nothingness. This complete subjugation is perhaps the most tragic aspect of their story. They were kings, once, with free will and dominion over their own fates. But in their pursuit of power, they surrendered the very thing that made them men. They became extensions of Sauron's will, instruments of his malice, their every thought and action dictated by his dark designs. Their screams, that chilling sound that struck terror into the hearts of mortals, were not merely expressions of aggression. They were also, perhaps, echoes of their own internal torment, the lingering anguish of lost identity, of a humanity irrevocably surrendered. Consider their role in the wider tapestry of Middle-earth's history. For centuries, they were the ultimate enforcers of Sauron's will, ensuring that no significant resistance could arise, that no light could shine too brightly against the encroaching shadow. They were present at key moments of darkness, the downfall of Arnor, the desolation of Eriador, the prolonged siege against Gondor. Their very presence was a weapon, inspiring fear and despair wherever they went. The tales of their cruelty and their unwavering pursuit of their master's enemies became legends, whispered in hushed tones, shaping the collective consciousness of Middle-earth. Children were warned of their approach, and even the bravest warriors felt their blood run cold at the sound of their screech. Yet as we have seen, even the most formidable evil can be challenged. The Nazgûl, for all their power, were not invincible. Their fear of fire, their vulnerability to certain forms of attack in the unseen world, and their ultimate tether to the One Ring, provided avenues for their eventual defeat. The encounter at the ford of Bruinen, where Glorfindel and Aragorn, with the aid of Elrond's magic, drove them into the raging waters, showcases a moment of vulnerability, a temporary setback for the Nine. Here, the power of the Eldar, combined with the strength of men, proved to be a formidable barrier. It was a reminder that even against such ancient evil, unity and courage could offer a glimmer of hope. Their pursuit of the ring-bearer, Frodo Baggins, became the central driving force of their existence in the final years of the Third Age. The ring, the source of their power, and the key to their master's ultimate victory, was also their undoing. Their unwavering focus on retrieving it led them across vast distances, exposing them to risks and ultimately paving the way for their final confrontation. The climax of their story at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, with the Witch King's personal attack on Minas Tirith, represents the zenith of their terrifying power and the dramatic culmination of their long history. The breaking of the gate, the fear they instilled in the defenders, the seemingly unstoppable force they represented, all of it speaks to their incredible potency. But it is in their defeat that we find the deepest lessons. The prophecy concerning the Witch King, that no living man could slay him, was not a mere riddle, but a testament to the unexpected nature of courage. Eowyn, a woman, and Merry, a hobbit, together defied centuries of expectation and brought down the seemingly invincible lord of the Nazgûl. This act was not a mere physical victory. It was a symbolic shattering of despair, a declaration that even the most ancient and entrenched evil could be overcome by the brave and the unexpected. It demonstrated that true power does not always reside in might or magic, but often in the resilience of spirit, in the willingness to stand against overwhelming odds. And then the final act, the destruction of the One Ring in the fires of Mount Doom. This was not a battle, not a duel, but an unraveling, a systemic collapse. The life force that sustained the Nazgûl, the very essence of their being, flowed from the ring and from Sauron. With the ring's destruction, Sauron's power was broken, and with it, the foundation upon which the Nazgûl's existence rested. Their final cries, those agonizing shrieks that echoed across the plains of Gorgoroth, were not merely the sounds of death. They were the dissolution of centuries of unnatural life, the unmaking of beings who had long defied the natural order. It was the sound of their souls, if they still possessed them, being dragged back into the void from which they had been unnaturally drawn. Their end was absolute, a complete erasure from the world. They left no legacy of their own, no monuments, no lasting impact beyond the terror they inspired. Their story serves as a profound cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the perils of unchecked ambition and the seductive allure of power. They were kings who sought immortality and found eternal servitude. They were men who desired dominion and became nameless shadows. Their tale is one of tragic grandeur, of beings who wielded immense power, but ultimately lost themselves in its embrace. As we allow these narratives to settle, let the quiet understanding of their history bring a sense of peace. The struggles of Middle-earth, the epic clashes between light and shadow, have long since passed into legend. The Nazgûl, once the embodiment of terror, are now but echoes in the ancient tales, their power dissolved, their presence vanished. The world, through the courage of many, was freed from their shadowy grasp. Let the lingering whispers of their story, the distant memory of their chilling cries, now soften into the gentle hum of the night. The epic of their rise and fall, a journey through darkness and ultimately to dissolution, now comes to its quiet close. May the knowledge of their ultimate defeat, the triumph of hope over despair, bring a profound sense of tranquility. The age of their terror is over, the long watch has ended, and the world can finally rest in peace. As you drift further into the embrace of sleep, know that even the deepest shadows eventually recede. The courage that faced the Nazgûl, the light that vanquished the darkness, is a timeless truth. Let that truth guide you into a restful slumber, free from fear, filled with the promise of quiet dreams and renewed peace. The night is soft, the stars are bright, and the world is safe once more. Sleep well. The echoes of their long history now blend into the stillness of this moment, like the fading twilight over the distant mountains of Middle-earth. We have journeyed through the ages, witnessing the slow corruption of men, their transformation into instruments of a greater darkness, and their eventual, complete unmaking. But the story of the Nazgûl, though concluded, is not merely a tale of a singular evil. It is interwoven with the very fabric of Middle-earth, a testament to the enduring struggle between light and shadow that defines its long history. Consider, for a moment, the vastness of that history, stretching back through the ages of the world, long before the sun and moon first graced the skies. The very coming of the Nazgûl into existence, though a pivotal moment in the Second Age, was a consequence of events set in motion far earlier, by beings of immense power and ancient wisdom. The Vala, those mighty spirits who shaped the world at the behest of Ilúvatar, had their own struggles and triumphs, their own moments of despair and hope. Melkor, the first Dark Lord, had sown seeds of discord from the very beginning, his malice twisting and corrupting all he touched. It was this ancient, primordial evil, inherited and amplified by his greatest servant, Sauron, that ultimately gave rise to the Ringwraiths. Sauron himself, once a Maya of Orlais, the smith, possessed a profound understanding of craftsmanship and order, a skill that he perverted to forge the rings of power. He was not merely a brute force. He was a manipulator, a deceiver, one who understood the desires and weaknesses of mortals. The Nine Kings, ambitious and yearning for power, were perfect targets for his insidious influence. They sought to transcend their mortal limitations, to achieve a form of immortality, and Sauron offered them a path, a false promise, cloaked in the allure of power. The rings he gave them were not simple adornments. They were conduits, subtle chains that bound their spirits to his will, slowly dissolving their individual identities until they were mere extensions of his own darkness. This slow decay, this gradual loss of self, is perhaps the most tragic aspect of their story. They were once rulers, men of renown, kings with their own domains and legacies. We do not know their individual names, nor the specific kingdoms they ruled, for their identities were consumed by the rings. This anonymity is a cruel irony, for in seeking to preserve their names for eternity, they utterly lost them. They became Nazgûl, a name that embodies their essence, ring-wraiths, shadows bound to the will of the One Ring, and through it, to Sauron. Their existence became a perpetual twilight, neither fully living nor truly dead, trapped in a state of agonizing non-being, forever yearning for the light they had forsaken. The very air around them, the landscape they traversed, became imbued with their aura of dread. The winds that carried their screams, the shadows they cast, all contributed to the pervasive fear that preceded their coming. They were not merely physical threats. They were psychological weapons, designed to break the will and instill despair. The mere rumor of their approach was enough to send entire populations into a panic. Their black robes, their unseen faces beneath the hoods, their silent, gliding movements on their fell beasts. Every aspect of their appearance was crafted to amplify their terrifying presence. Even without their physical might, the terror they inspired was a potent force in the war against the free peoples of Middle-earth. Their fell beasts, those monstrous winged creatures, were an extension of their power, a symbol of their unnatural dominion over life. These creatures, born of darkness and bred for malice, were themselves instruments of terror, their screeching cries piercing the very soul. The image of the Nazgûl, astride these beasts, soaring through the darkened skies, is one of the most enduring and chilling in all of Tolkien's mythos. It speaks to a world where ancient horrors still held sway, where the boundaries between the living and the spectral were blurred by the machinations of evil. Yet, despite their overwhelming power and the dread they inspired, the Nazgûl were ultimately bound not just by Sauron's will, but by their own limitations. They were slaves, not masters. Their strength was derived from the One Ring, and their effectiveness waned when it was not in Sauron's possession. Their fear of water, their aversion to fire in certain contexts, these were subtle weaknesses that hinted at the fragility beneath their terrifying exterior. They were not invincible, and in their encounters with those who possess true courage and pure hearts, their power could be challenged. Think of Glorfindel, the elf lord who bravely faced them at the ford of Bruinen, his radiant presence driving them back. Or Aragorn, the heir of Isildur, who with torch and sword stood against them at Weathertop, though wounded, his valour unbroken. Even Frodo, small and seemingly insignificant, possessed a resilience that defied their power, a purity of heart that kept him from succumbing entirely to their corrupting influence. These moments highlight a fundamental truth, that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, the light of courage, hope, and compassion can endure and even prevail. Their role in the narrative of Middle-earth is multifaceted. They are not merely villains. They are tragic figures, cautionary tales, and instruments of fate. They serve to highlight the seductive nature of power and the devastating consequences of ambition unchecked. Their existence underscores the importance of humility, of recognizing one's mortal limitations, and of resisting the urge to grasp for that which is not rightfully one's own. Their story is a mirror reflecting the moral choices faced by all beings, and the paths, both righteous and ruinous, that lie before them. As their presence recedes into the quiet annals of history, we are left with a deeper appreciation for the profound balance of forces in Middle-earth. The Nazgûl were a force of unbalance, a disruption of the natural order, and their ultimate destruction was a restoration of that balance. Their long, terrifying reign ended not with a whimper, but with a cataclysmic shriek, signifying the tearing apart of an unnatural bond. The world, bruised and scarred, could finally begin to heal. The silence that now follows their story is a profound one. It is the silence of peace after conflict, of stillness after storm. It is a reminder that even the most terrifying nightmares eventually dissipate with the dawn. The Nazgûl, once a living embodiment of fear, are now but a whispered memory, their power utterly dissolved, their influence forever banished. They are a testament to the enduring power of hope, the resilience of good, and the ultimate triumph of light over the deepest shadows. As these thoughts gently settle in your mind, allow the stories of Middle-earth to become a comforting presence, a lullaby of heroism and quiet victory. The long struggle is over. The heroes have found their rest, and the world is safe. Let the knowledge of their ultimate peace wash over you, a soothing wave carrying you further into the depths of tranquil slumber. The age of fear has passed, giving way to an era of peace, and with it, the promise of undisturbed dreams. The night is quiet, the stars are watching over you, and all is well in the world. Rest now in the gentle embrace of this timeless tale. The whispers of the past, though potent, now fade into a gentle hum, a quiet assurance that the darkest chapters have closed. Imagine, if you will, the vast, silent plains of Rohan, stretching under a sky where the twin moons might cast their soft glow, unmarred by the shadow of the Black Riders. Envision the ancient forests of Lothlorien, their golden leaves rustling in a breeze that carries no hint of the chilling cries that once pierced the night. This is the peace that was hard won, a tranquility bought with courage and sacrifice, a peace that now cradles you in its soothing embrace. The story of the Nazgûl, though filled with dread, ultimately leads to this very quietude. Their existence, bound as it was to the will of Sauron, was one of ceaseless torment, a perpetual unlife that knew no rest. They were spirits trapped in a material world, stretched thin between realms, their senses distorted, their minds warped by the power they had so eagerly embraced. Consider the weight of such an existence, an eternity of servitude, of hunting and harrying, of feeling the world as a distant, fading echo, while the master's will burned ever brighter within their hollow core. Their power was immense, yes, but it was a borrowed power, a reflection of Sauron's own malevolence, and like all reflections, it lacked true substance, true life. They were once kings, sorcerers, and mighty warriors, men of renown in their time, who reached for immortality and instead found an eternal damnation. This transformation from living men to spectral wraiths is one of the most poignant and terrifying aspects of their legend. It speaks to the insidious nature of ambition, the way a noble desire, twisted by avarice and fear of death, can lead to utter ruin. They sought to escape mortality, to transcend the natural order, and in doing so, they became something far worse than mortal. They became slaves to a power that consumed their very being, leaving only a shell guided by a dark will. Their voices, once commanding and authoritative, became the dreadful shriek that instilled fear into the hearts of mortals. Their faces, once perhaps handsome or wise, were replaced by the terrifying visage of the Lord of the Nazgûl, or the unseen horror beneath their cloaks. Their bodies, once warm and vibrant, became cold and ethereal, yet capable of inflicting immense pain and terror. They moved with a chilling grace, their black robes flowing like shadows, their steeds, whether living or fell beast, extensions of their dark purpose. The ring wraiths were more than just Sauron's lieutenants. They were extensions of his will, his primary instruments of terror and subjugation. They possessed a unique insight into the unseen world, a realm normally hidden from mortal eyes. This allowed them to perceive things that others could not, to sense the presence of the One Ring, and to wield a fear that was not merely psychological, but almost physical in its impact. Their very presence could drain hope, chill the heart, and compel submission. It was this power, this ability to sow dread, that made them so effective in Sauron's service. Yet despite their overwhelming power and their terrifying aspect, they were not truly invincible. Their connection to the unseen world also made them vulnerable to certain forms of attack, particularly those wielded by beings with a strong spiritual affinity, or by those who had faced and overcome great fear. The courage of those who defied them, the light of hope in the hearts of the free peoples, and the ultimate sacrifice of those who fought against the encroaching darkness, all contributed to their eventual downfall. Think of their relentless pursuit of Frodo and the One Ring, a chase that spanned vast distances and instilled a sense of desperate urgency. Their presence was a constant threat, a dark cloud hanging over the Fellowship, pushing them to their limits. The famous encounter at Weathertop, where the Nazgûl nearly claimed Frodo, stands as a stark reminder of their terrifying efficacy. Frodo's subsequent journey to Rivendell, under the dire effects of the Morgul knife, illustrated the very real danger they posed, not just to the body, but to the spirit. The wound was not merely physical, it was a spiritual poison, a slow corruption that sought to drag him into their own spectral existence. The flight to the ford of Bruinen, with Arwen's defiant stand, symbolized a crucial turning point. The forces of nature, aided by elven magic, swept the Nazgûl away, temporarily diminishing their power and forcing them to return to Mordor to recuperate. This moment, when the river rose in defiance, was a testament to the resilience of Middle-earth itself, a subtle hint that the land itself would resist the encroaching shadow. Their return, mounted upon the hideous fell beasts, marked a new phase in their terror. These winged creatures, ancient and foul, allowed the Nazgûl to survey vast areas, to strike from the sky, and to deliver an even greater sense of despair to those below. The sound of their wings, the shriek from above, became synonymous with the escalating war, a harbinger of doom for the besieged cities and armies. The Battle of the Pelennor Fields, where the Witch King of Angmar met his end, represents the climax of their destructive power and the moment of their greatest vulnerability. The prophecy surrounding the Witch King, that he would not fall by the hand of man, created a sense of despair and invincibility around him. This prophecy, however, was not an absolute shield, but a finely woven thread of fate. It was a woman, Eowyn, shield maiden of Rohan, and a hobbit, Merry Brandybuck, wielding a blade forged in ancient times to fight the Witch King's former master, who ultimately brought him low. This unexpected combination, a woman defying gendered expectations and a small hobbit with a seemingly insignificant weapon, demonstrates that even the most ancient prophecies can have unforeseen interpretations, and that true heroism can emerge from the most unlikely sources. Their defiance, born of love and loyalty, pierced the veil of fear that surrounded the Witch King, allowing his final, shattering defeat. The destruction of the One Ring, the source of Sauron's power and the very anchor of the Nazgûl's existence in the material world, was the ultimate undoing of the ring wraiths. When the ring was cast into the fires of Mount Doom, the bond that held them was severed with an unimaginable force. Their last shriek, a sound of utter despair and dissolution, echoed through the dying lands of Mordor, a final, terrible symphony of their unmaking. With Sauron's power broken, they were finally released from their torment, not into peace, but into nothingness, their essences scattered, their long, dreadful story finally concluded. Their tale, though dark, is not without its lessons. It speaks to the dangers of unchecked power, the corrupting influence of ambition, and the ultimate futility of seeking unnatural longevity. It also highlights the enduring strength of the human spirit, the courage of the small and the unassuming, and the power of acts of kindness and self-sacrifice. The Nazgûl serve as a stark contrast to the heroes of Middle-earth, their hollow existence a foil to the vibrant lives of those who fought for freedom and light. As the echoes of their history fade into the quiet of this moment, let the deeper meaning of their story settle within you. Their end was a necessary one, a cleansing of a deep wound that had festered in the heart of Middle-earth for centuries. The world could not truly heal, could not truly find peace, while their spectral presence haunted its lands. Their dissolution was not merely a victory in war, but a restoration of balance, a return to the natural order of things. Now the air is clear, the shadows have receded, and the distant stars twinkle with a gentle, reassuring light. The stories of Middle-earth, with all their struggles and triumphs, now rest in a quiet corner of your mind, a rich tapestry of courage and wonder. Allow yourself to drift further into the realm of dreams, knowing that the long night of the Nazgûl is over, and a new, brighter dawn has broken. The world is at peace, and you too can find your rest, enveloped in the calm aftermath of a tale well told. Sleep deeply, and let the peace of Middle-earth be your lullaby. The whispers of the wind now carry only the gentle rustle of leaves, no longer the chilling cries of the Nine. The memory of their terror, though profound, now settles into a quiet corner of history, a lesson etched into the fabric of time. Their existence, born of a thirst for power and a surrender to the seductive promises of a dark lord, serves as a timeless reminder of the insidious grip that ambition can take upon the hearts of even the mightiest. Imagine, if you will, the 9 kings, once proud and powerful, holding sway over their respective realms. Their crowns glittered, their coffers overflowed, and their word was law. Yet within them, a subtle gnawing began, a dissatisfaction with the finite nature of their lives, a yearning for something more, something eternal. It was this very yearning that Sauron, the great deceiver, exploited with such cunning. He presented them with the rings of power, glittering jewels of untold beauty and apparent beneficence, promising them not just power, but a dominion over the very concept of time, an escape from the inevitable decay of flesh and spirit. These rings, crafted with dark magic and imbued with a fraction of Sauron's own malevolent will, were irresistible. Each king, in his own time, slipped the ring onto his finger, believing he was gaining mastery over his destiny, extending his reign indefinitely. For a time, perhaps, they did indeed feel an exhilaration, an expansion of their senses, a sharpening of their intellect. They commanded greater respect. Their influence grew, and their enemies withered before them. The world, for a brief, glorious period, seemed to bend to their will. But the price, as always with such dark bargains, was immeasurable. The rings, far from granting them true immortality, instead slowly but surely tethered them to the unseen world, drawing them away from the vibrant reality they once inhabited. Their physical forms became attenuated, their senses dulled to the warmth of the sun and the softness of the earth. The joy of a feast, the comfort of a loved one's embrace, the simple pleasure of a morning breeze. All these slowly faded, replaced by a growing chill, an insatiable hunger for the power that sustained their unnatural existence. The transition was not instantaneous, not a sudden plunge into darkness, but a gradual, insidious erosion. Day by day, year by year, the light within them diminished, replaced by a shadow that deepened with every passing moment. Their voices, once rich with command, grew hoarse and rasping, until at last they became the dreaded shriek, a sound of pure malevolence that struck terror into the hearts of all who heard it. Their faces, once reflecting the varied countenances of men, became indistinct, shadowed forms beneath their cowls, their eyes no longer seeing the world as we know it, but rather perceiving the spectral realm where Sauron held sway. The gift of the rings, which they had embraced as a blessing, became their eternal curse. They became slaves to Sauron's will, bound to him by the very power they had sought to wield. Their individual identities, their names, their histories, all dissolved into a collective spectral entity. The Nazgûl, the ring wraiths, the most terrible of all Sauron's servants. Their long watches, their ceaseless hunts, their tireless pursuit of the One Ring, were not born of loyalty, but of an unbreakable compulsion, a torment that knew no end. Even in their diminished state, their ancient skills and their inherent strength as rulers did not entirely vanish. They retained an uncanny ability to inspire fear, a mastery of stealth, and a chilling effectiveness in battle, particularly in the shadow of night. Their very presence was a weapon, a psychological assault that could break the strongest wills. They were the embodiment of dread, a living, breathing testament to the corrupting power of the unseen. Think of the vast stretches of time they endured, centuries upon centuries of this spectral existence. The rise and fall of kingdoms, the birth and death of countless generations of men, the slow, inexorable turning of the ages, all passed before them as they remained, unchanging in their torment, eternally bound to their dark master. Their memory, though fragmented, must have held echoes of their former lives, fleeting glimpses of sunlight and laughter, only to be immediately extinguished by the suffocating darkness of their present reality. This constant awareness of what they had lost, combined with the relentless pressure of Sauron's will, must have been a form of hell beyond human comprehension. Their mounts, the great fell beasts, were a terrifying extension of their malevolent presence. These creatures, born of darkness and raised in the pits of Mordor, shrieked in unison with their riders, their wings beating a dreadful rhythm in the night sky. They were not merely steeds, but extensions of the Nazgûl's power, capable of inspiring panic and despair in those below. The image of a black rider on a winged beast, soaring silently through the moonlit clouds, was a sight that could freeze the blood in any heart. Yet for all their power, for all their terror, they were not truly free. They were instruments, tools in the hand of a greater evil, their every movement, every thought, ultimately dictated by the will of Sauron. They were a vivid illustration of the ultimate futility of seeking power for its own sake, for in doing so, they lost the very essence of what it meant to be alive. Their long night was a testament to the fact that true strength lies not in dominion over others, but in freedom of spirit, in the courage to choose light over darkness, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Their narrative arc, from powerful kings to spectral servants, is a cautionary tale woven into the very fabric of Middle-earth. It reminds us that even the most benevolent desires, when twisted by ambition, can lead to unforeseen and terrible consequences. The pursuit of immortality, when sought through unnatural means, can often lead to a fate worse than death itself. An endless, desolate existence devoid of joy, love, or hope. As the last lingering image of the Nazgûl fades from your mind, replaced by the comforting darkness of your surroundings, understand that their end was not merely a defeat, but a necessary purification. Their presence was a stain upon the beauty of Middle-earth, a constant reminder of the shadow that had threatened to engulf all light. Their final dissolution, though a moment of intense despair for them, was a moment of profound liberation for the world. The quiet now deepens, enveloping you completely. The struggles of Middle-earth, the clash of good and evil, the rise and fall of kingdoms, all recede into the gentle background of memory. What remains is a sense of peace, a quiet understanding of the intricate tapestry of existence. The stories are told, the dangers averted, and the world is now at rest. Allow this profound tranquility to wash over you, a soothing balm for the mind and spirit. The long journey through the history of the Nazgûl has reached its natural conclusion, and with it, the echoes of their existence have finally faded into the silence. There is nothing left to fear, only the gentle embrace of slumber. Let your breath become slow and even, your thoughts drift like clouds in a vast empty sky. The peace of Middle-earth, now restored, extends to you, a quiet blessing for a night of deep and undisturbed rest. Sleep now, knowing that the shadows have passed, and only peace remains. The whispers of the past, though potent, now soften into the gentle hum of the present moment. Imagine, if you will, the vast, star-dusted canopy above Middle-earth, now untroubled by the dark wings of the Nazgûl. The air, once heavy with their spectral chill, now carries only the sweet scent of night-blooming flowers and the distant murmur of a tranquil stream. This quietude is not an absence, but a presence, a profound sense of well-being that settles upon the land like a soft, comforting blanket. Consider the very nature of their existence, born from the allure of power, forged in the fires of Mount Doom, and ultimately undone by the very source of their strength. The rings of power, crafted with such intricate deceit, promised dominion, but delivered only servitude. For these 9 kings, once proud and influential in their respective realms, the promise of extended life and enhanced might proved to be an irresistible lure. They were mortals, after all, susceptible to the same fundamental desires that drive all living beings: the wish to overcome limitations, to extend one's reach beyond the natural bounds of existence. But Sauron, the master craftsman of illusion, understood that true power lay not in possession, but in control. He offered them a taste of divinity, knowing full well that the price would be their very souls. The process of their transformation was gradual, insidious. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic plunge into darkness, but a slow, almost imperceptible erosion of their humanity. Each time they wore their rings, each time they wielded the power granted to them, a tiny fragment of their essence was chipped away, absorbed by the pervasive will of Sauron. Their bodies, once vibrant and strong, began to fade from the visible world, becoming increasingly ethereal, bound to the unseen realm. This fading was not a sign of weakness, but of their increasing connection to the spiritual plane, a realm dominated by the Dark Lord. Think of it as a slow withdrawal from the world of light and tangibility. Their vision shifted, their senses warped. They no longer perceived the beauty of a sunrise or the warmth of a loved one's touch. Instead, they saw only the shadows, the fear, the despair that Sauron desired them to cultivate. Their voices, once capable of counsel and command, became the dreaded shriek, a sound that could curdle blood and sow terror in the hearts of even the bravest. This sound was not merely a weapon, it was a manifestation of their torment, a cry of their lost humanity echoing through the desolate void of their existence. Their horses, those magnificent, dark steeds, were not merely mounts, but extensions of their malevolent will. Bred in the dark stables of Mordor, these creatures were themselves corrupted, their eyes burning with an unnatural fire, their hooves striking sparks from the very stones they trod upon. They moved with a chilling silence, their passage marked only by the sudden drop in temperature, the palpable sense of dread that preceded their arrival. Later, when the winged beasts of Mordor, the fell beasts, became their steeds, their terror reached new heights, allowing them to cast vast shadows upon the land, symbols of Sauron's encroaching dominion. These creatures, ancient and fearsome, were perfect vessels for the Nazgûl, allowing them to strike from the skies, their cries amplified by the vastness of the heavens. The Nazgûl were not mindless drones, however. They retained a semblance of their former cunning, their strategic prowess. Each of them, in their mortal life, had been a king, a sorcerer, a powerful warrior. Traces of these former identities lingered, albeit twisted and perverted by Sauron's influence. The Witch King of Angmar, for instance, once a great Númenórean lord, commanded armies and wielded dark sorcery, his strategic mind still sharp, though entirely dedicated to the ruin of men. Khamûl, the Black Easterling, the second in command, retained a subtle cunning, often used for reconnaissance and the pursuit of valuable targets. These remnants of their past made them all the more dangerous, for they could anticipate the actions of mortals, understanding their weaknesses and exploiting their fears. Their quest for the One Ring was not just a mission dictated by Sauron. It was an innate, inescapable compulsion. The One Ring, the Master Ring, held a direct connection to their own rings and thus to their very existence. Its absence, its hidden status, was a constant irritant, a phantom limb that throbbed with an unceasing ache. They could feel its presence, a faint whisper across the vast expanses of Middle-earth, a magnetic pull that drew them relentlessly towards it. This connection was a double-edged sword. It gave them a unique advantage in its pursuit, but it also bound them inextricably to Sauron's will, making them utterly dependent on his power. Imagine the subtle torture of this dependency, to be forever searching, forever yearning for something that, when found, would only tighten the chains that bound you. Their existence was a perpetual hunt, a relentless pursuit of an object that promised both their completion and their utter enslavement. There was no escape, no respite from this burning desire, this consuming need. Their encounters with the forces of good were always fraught with palpable tension. The mere presence of the Nazgûl was enough to instill panic, to drain the courage from even the stoutest hearts. Yet there were those who dared to stand against them. Aragorn, at Weathertop, with his flaming brand, bravely faced their assault, momentarily driving them back. Gandalf, with his powerful light and unwavering resolve, was a force they dared not directly confront without the full might of their master behind them. And of course, the Hobbits, with their unexpected resilience and courage, often found themselves directly in the path of these spectral hunters. Frodo, bearing the ring, experienced their presence most acutely, the world around him blurring as he slipped closer to their unseen realm, the boundaries between life and death becoming terrifyingly thin. The very air around them seemed to thicken with dread, draining hope and courage from those nearby. Their touch, though spectral, could bring a chilling cold, a touch of death. The Morgul knife that pierced Frodo's shoulder was not merely a weapon. It was a blade imbued with dark sorcery, designed to slowly turn its victim into a wraith, to drag them across the threshold into the dark, unseen world that the Nazgûl inhabited. This was their ultimate weapon, to condemn others to a similar fate, to swell the ranks of the shadowy servants of Mordor. Their long wait in the shadows of Mordor, during the centuries of Sauron's apparent dormancy, must have been an existence of profound emptiness. Bound to their rings, they could not truly rest, nor could they fully engage with the world. They were spectres, lingering in the desolate corners of the world, their power diminished by their master's weakened state, yet still present, a faint, chilling hum in the background of history. Imagine hundreds of years spent in this state of suspended animation, a conscious, ever-present yearning for the return of their master, for the renewal of their strength. This prolonged period of waiting only deepened their despair, solidifying their commitment to Sauron, for he was their only hope of meaningful existence. Their return to full power coincided with Sauron's re-emergence, their spectral forms solidifying, their terror amplified. The War of the Ring was their ultimate test, their final opportunity to fulfill their purpose. They were the harbingers of Sauron's wrath, the vanguard of his armies, the embodiment of his tireless cruelty. Their presence alone was a psychological weapon, eroding the will to resist, instilling a sense of inevitable doom. But even in their relentless pursuit, their terrifying power, there was a fundamental flaw, a blind spot inherent in their spectral nature. They could not fully comprehend the resilience of hope, the unexpected courage of the small, the power of selfless love. These were concepts alien to their twisted existence, emotions that had long been purged from their desiccated souls. They sought power, dominion, and order imposed through fear, failing to grasp the enduring strength of freedom and compassion. This fundamental misunderstanding ultimately proved to be their undoing. The moment of their final defeat at the hands of Éowyn and Merry was a culmination of unexpected bravery and ancient prophecy. The Witch King, mighty and seemingly invincible, was brought low not by a great warrior, but by a woman and a hobbit, defying his arrogance and the very predictions of old. This act was symbolic, a triumph of the overlooked and underestimated, a testament to the fact that even the greatest darkness can be vanquished by the smallest sparks of light. The other Nazgûl, then consumed by the fiery destruction of the One Ring, simply ceased to be. Their existence, so long intertwined with Sauron's power, unraveled with the destruction of the very object that sustained them. Their end was not a glorious battle, but a dissolution, a fading into nothingness. There was no afterlife for them, no redemption, only an oblivion from which they could never return. The rings of power which had granted them their terrible existence also sealed their fate, drawing them into the void when their source of power was unmade. It was a complete and utter cessation, a final silence after centuries of spectral cries. Now, as the memory of their chilling presence continues to recede, let the quiet of this moment settle even deeper within you. The wind whispers through the imaginary trees of Middle-earth, carrying with it no echo of their dreadful shriek, only the soft rustle of leaves. The rivers flow unimpeded, their waters clear and untroubled by any shadow. The stars above shine with an unblemished brilliance, their light undimmed by the pall of Mordor. The long journey of the Nazgûl, from their origins as kings to their end as spectral servants, serves as a profound narrative within the larger tapestry of Middle-earth. It is a story of ambition twisted, of power corrupted, and ultimately of the unyielding strength of light against shadow. They were a powerful force, a terrible embodiment of evil, yet their ultimate demise underscores the transient nature of even the most formidable darkness. Allow the gentle current of these thoughts to carry you further into a state of profound relaxation. The epic struggles, the desperate quests, the clashes of ancient powers, all now dissolve into a soft, murmuring background. What remains is a feeling of safety, of comfort, of a world that has found its peace. You are now free to drift, unburdened by the echoes of past conflicts, embraced by the stillness of the present. The history of the Nazgûl has been told, their chapter closed, and the world of Middle-earth, in its tranquil slumber, invites you to join its quiet repose. Let your worries gently slip away, dissolving like morning mist, leaving only the calm certainty of undisturbed rest. Sleep deeply, sleep peacefully, knowing that the shadows have truly passed, and only peace remains. The vast expanse of the night sky stretches above you, a shimmering canvas of distant stars, each one a tiny beacon of calm in the immense darkness. Imagine yourself beneath this endless canopy, perhaps on a gentle hillside in the Shire, where the air is sweet with the scent of damp earth and blooming wildflowers. There are no threats here, no spectral riders, only the soft chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl, sounds that lull you further into tranquility. The very concept of the Nazgûl, these ancient corrupted kings, now fades into the realm of forgotten tales, like whispers on the wind that no longer hold any power. Their story, while dark and compelling, is now complete, a closed book on a dusty shelf in a quiet library. The weight of their existence, the terror they inspired, has lifted, revealing a world where such shadows no longer hold sway. Think of the long centuries they endured, bound to the will of Sauron, stripped of their former glory, their human forms consumed by the relentless power of the rings. It was a slow, agonizing transformation, a descent into an unlife of perpetual servitude and despair. In their beginnings, before the shadow fully claimed them, they were men of great stature and influence, rulers in their own right, commanding respect and wielding power over their kingdoms. These were not common men, but individuals of exceptional will and ambition, qualities that Sauron, in his cunning, skillfully exploited. He sought out those whose hearts harbored a deep desire for dominion, for wealth, for eternal life. Desires that, when unchecked, could be twisted into instruments of his own malevolent will. The rings he offered were irresistible lures, glittering promises of enhanced power and extended years, gifts that seemed to elevate them beyond the limitations of mortal men. Yet these gifts were poisoned, each one a golden chain, forged to bind them ever closer to the Dark Lord. The precise identities of these 9 kings are largely lost to the mists of time, deliberately obscured by Sauron to further diminish their individuality and reinforce their subservience. However, a few fragments of their past remain, hinted at in ancient lore. One, it is believed, was a great sorcerer, a master of dark arts who delved too deeply into forbidden knowledge, his quest for power leading him down a path from which there was no return. Another was a king of men, powerful and renowned in his own age, who craved an empire that would endure beyond his mortal lifespan, a desire Sauron readily stoked, and among them, it is said, was a king from the Easterlings, a warrior of formidable might from lands far to the east, whose ambition knew no bounds. These glimpses, however brief, serve to underscore the tragic irony of their fate. Once mighty rulers, now voiceless wraiths, their identities swallowed by the collective horror of the Nazgûl. The rings of power, crafted with such deceptive beauty, were the key to their undoing. Each ring possessed immense power, designed to amplify the natural abilities and desires of its wearer. For the men who received them, these rings granted not only extended life, but also enhanced influence, wisdom, and a mastery over their domains that seemed almost supernatural. They became mighty warlords, their commands obeyed without question, their presence inspiring awe and fear. Their kingdoms flourished under their seemingly immortal guidance, their subjects unaware of the insidious price being paid. The passage of time, however, began to work its slow, terrible magic. The life granted by the rings was not true life, but a prolonged existence that gradually eroded their physical forms and their very sense of self. They became increasingly bound to the unseen world, their eyes losing their mortal sight, their voices becoming mere whispers to ordinary ears. As the years stretched into centuries, their bodies became transparent, their once vibrant forms fading into ethereal shadows, their human senses dulled, replaced by an acute awareness of the spiritual realm, a world of whispers and unseen currents of power. The very air around them became a source of discomfort, for they were no longer truly part of the living world. They became slaves to the ring, and through the ring, to Sauron, their minds slowly but surely subsumed by his will. Their individual ambitions, their former loyalties, their very memories were systematically erased, replaced by an absolute and unwavering devotion to the Dark Lord. Their existence became a perpetual twilight, a state of being neither truly alive nor truly dead, forever tethered to the power that had both cursed and sustained them. The Witch King of Angmar, their leader, stands as a particularly poignant example of this tragic transformation. He was, by all accounts, once a king of Númenórean lineage, a man of noble birth and immense power. His ambition, perhaps more than any of the others, was boundless, and he was among the first to fall under the sway of Sauron's rings. After taking his ring, he vanished from the sight of men for a time, only to reappear centuries later as the dread Lord of Angmar, a northern kingdom forged in shadow and terror. Here, he waged a relentless war against the northern Dúnedain and the Elves, earning his terrible title and establishing a dominion of fear that lasted for centuries. His cruelty was legendary, his power immense, and he became the most feared of all the Nazgûl, a true lieutenant of Sauron, wielding a power almost as great as his master's. His defeat at the hands of Glorfindel and Anur at the Battle of Fornost, though a temporary setback, merely reinforced the prophecy that no living man could slay him. This prophecy, spoken by Glorfindel, inadvertently contributed to the Witch King's arrogance and belief in his own invincibility, a fatal flaw that would ultimately lead to his true demise. It was not a man, but a woman, Éowyn, and a hobbit, Merry, who would finally bring about his end, demonstrating that even the most ancient and terrible prophecies can be fulfilled in unexpected ways. The Nazgûl, in their spectral forms, were particularly vulnerable to certain things. Light, especially pure sunlight, caused them discomfort, forcing them to operate primarily under the cover of night, or beneath the pall of Mordor. Water, especially flowing water, also seemed to impede them, acting as a barrier they could not easily cross. This was due to their ethereal nature, their connection to the unseen world making them sensitive to the elemental purity of water. Yet their greatest weakness lay in their absolute dependence on the One Ring, and by extension, on Sauron himself. Their power was not their own, but a reflection of his, and without it, they were nothing. Their mounts were also a crucial aspect of their terrifying presence. In the early days of their re-emergence, they rode dreadful black horses, steeds bred for speed and endurance, twisted by Sauron's will to endure the presence of their spectral riders. These horses were themselves agents of fear, their thundering hooves and snorting breath adding to the dread inspired by the Nazgûl. Later, after their horses perished in the flood at the ford of Bruinen, they took to the skies on fell beasts, monstrous winged creatures with leathery wings and screeching cries. These creatures were not natural animals, but corrupted beings, creations of some ancient evil, perhaps bred in the dark pits of Mordor. Their appearance in the sky heralded doom, their shadows falling over the land like a pall, their piercing shrieks striking terror into the bravest of hearts. The shriek of the Nazgûl was perhaps their most iconic and terrifying weapon. It was not merely a sound, but a manifestation of their malice and despair, a piercing wail that could shatter the will of men and drive them to madness. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated evil echoing through the night, a chilling reminder of their spectral presence. This shriek was especially potent against those who harbored fear in their hearts, amplifying their terror and leaving them vulnerable to the wraith's influence. Now, as the memory of their chilling presence continues to recede, let the quiet of this moment settle even deeper within you. The wind whispers through the imaginary trees of Middle-earth, carrying with it no echo of their dreadful shriek, only the soft rustle of leaves. The rivers flow unimpeded, their waters clear and untroubled by any shadow. The stars above shine with an unblemished brilliance, their light undimmed by the pall of Mordor. The long journey of the Nazgûl, from their origins as kings to their end as spectral servants, serves as a profound narrative within the larger tapestry of Middle-earth. It is a story of ambition twisted, of power corrupted, and ultimately of the unyielding strength of light against shadow. They were a powerful force, a terrible embodiment of evil, yet their ultimate demise underscores the transient nature of even the most formidable darkness. Allow the gentle current of these thoughts to carry you further into a state of profound relaxation. The epic struggles, the desperate quests, the clashes of ancient powers, all now dissolve into a soft, murmuring background. What remains is a feeling of safety, of comfort, of a world that has found its peace. You are now free to drift, unburdened by the echoes of past conflicts, embraced by the stillness of the present. The history of the Nazgûl has been told, their chapter closed, and the world of Middle-earth, in its tranquil slumber, invites you to join its quiet repose. Let your worries gently slip away, dissolving like morning mist, leaving only the calm certainty of undisturbed rest. Sleep deeply, sleep peacefully, knowing that the shadows have truly passed and only peace remains. The very air around you is soft and still, inviting you to release any lingering tension. Imagine the gentle rise and fall of your breath, a natural rhythm that guides you deeper into this peaceful state. The concepts of power and corruption, of ancient evils and epic battles, now feel distant like faint echoes from a time long past, no longer capable of disturbing your tranquility. Think of the enduring beauty of Middle-earth, now restored to its former glory. The sun rises over the misty mountains, casting long, warm shadows across the valleys. The elves sing their ancient songs in untouched forests, their voices like silver bells carried on the breeze. The hobbits enjoy their simple lives in the Shire, their concerns no greater than a good meal and a comfortable armchair by the fire. The world has healed, and the scars of war are fading, leaving only stories to be told in hushed tones, stories that, in their telling, become less frightening and more a testament to perseverance and hope. The Nazgûl, in their long reign of terror, represented the ultimate suppression of individuality and will. They were the embodiment of Sauron's desire to control all life, to bend it to his purpose, to extinguish all light and joy. Yet even in their terrifying power, they were ultimately fragile, their existence tied to a single object, a single malevolent will. When that will was broken and that object destroyed, they too dissolved, proving that even the most seemingly invincible darkness can be vanquished by the smallest sparks of light. The other Nazgûl, then consumed by the fiery destruction of the One Ring, simply ceased to be. Their existence, so long intertwined with Sauron's power, unraveled with the destruction of the very object that sustained them. Their end was not a glorious battle, but a dissolution, a fading into nothingness. There was no afterlife for them, no redemption, only an oblivion from which they could never return. The rings of power, which had granted them their terrible existence, also sealed their fate, drawing them into the void when their source of power was unmade. It was a complete and utter cessation, a final silence after centuries of spectral cries. Now, as the memory of their chilling presence continues to recede, let the quiet of this moment settle even deeper within you. The wind whispers through the imaginary trees of Middle-earth, carrying with it no echo of their dreadful shriek, only the soft rustle of leaves. The rivers flow unimpeded, their waters clear and untroubled by any shadow. The stars above shine with an unblemished brilliance, their light undimmed by the pall of Mordor. The long journey of the Nazgûl, from their origins as kings to their end as spectral servants, serves as a profound narrative within the larger tapestry of Middle-earth. It is a story of ambition twisted, of power corrupted, and ultimately of the unyielding strength of light against shadow. They were a powerful force, a terrible embodiment of evil, yet their ultimate demise underscores the transient nature of even the most formidable darkness. Allow the gentle current of these thoughts to carry you further into a state of profound relaxation. The epic struggles, the desperate quests, the clashes of ancient powers, all now dissolve into a soft, murmuring background. What remains is a feeling of safety, of comfort, of a world that has found its peace. You are now free to drift, unburdened by the echoes of past conflicts, embraced by the stillness of the present. The history of the Nazgûl has been told, their chapter closed, and the world of Middle-earth, in its tranquil slumber, invites you to join its quiet repose. Let your worries gently slip away, dissolving like morning mist, leaving only the calm certainty of undisturbed rest. Sleep deeply, sleep peacefully, knowing that the shadows have truly passed and only peace remains. Feel the gentle ebb and flow of your breath, a comforting rhythm that carries you deeper into a state of serene calm. Imagine the soft warmth of a blanket around you, a feeling of absolute security and comfort. The world outside this moment holds no demands, no expectations, only the quiet invitation to deeply rest. The great tales of Middle-earth, with all their drama and conflict, now serve merely as a lullaby, a soft narrative woven to guide you into profound sleep. Their purpose has been fulfilled. The stories have been told, and the long night of history has concluded. All that remains is peace. Allow your mind to wander gently through fields of green, under skies of endless blue, with no trace of the darkness that once loomed. The air is fresh and pure, carrying the scent of distant flowers and ancient trees. There is a sense of completion, of closure, as the last vestiges of the Nazgûl's terrible reign dissipate into nothingness. Their legacy is not one of triumph, but of failure, a stark reminder that even the most formidable evil can be overcome by courage, hope, and the unexpected strength of the small and humble. The very essence of this quiet moment is a gift, a space where the mind can release its burdens and the body can find true repose. You are safe, you are warm, and you are completely at peace. The long and winding paths of Middle-earth's history have led to this tranquil destination, a place of quietude where the past is merely a gentle echo, and the present is an invitation to deep, restorative sleep. Let every breath take you deeper, every thought dissolve into the soft silence. The journey through the lore of the Nazgûl has reached its end, and with it, any lingering shadows have vanished, leaving only the unblemished light of undisturbed rest. The lingering whispers of ancient evils have faded into the quiet hum of night, replaced by the soft whisper of your own breathing, a steady current guiding you further into profound relaxation. Imagine the distant stars, countless and serene, casting their gentle light across an untroubled sky. Their brilliance does not demand attention, but rather offers a quiet, shimmering presence, a cosmic lullaby to accompany your descent into slumber. Feel the gentle weight of your eyelids, growing heavier with each passing moment, a comforting surrender to the deepening calm. The intricate tapestry of Middle-earth's history, with its monumental struggles and its moments of profound despair, has now settled into a hushed memory, a story told and concluded, leaving only the tranquil afterglow of resolution. The Nazgûl, those terrifying spectres of shadow and despair, are now mere figments of a bygone era, their power utterly dissolved, their influence completely nullified. They are but echoes in the vast, still chambers of the past, unable to touch the quiet sanctuary you now inhabit. Allow your thoughts to drift like fallen leaves upon a placid stream, carried away effortlessly, without resistance or concern. The world beyond this moment, with its demands and its ceaseless motion, recedes further and further, becoming a distant, indistinct hum, utterly separate from the deep quietude that embraces you now. Your focus narrows to the gentle rhythm of your own heart, a steady, unfaltering drumbeat that resonates with the peace surrounding you. The very air you breathe feels softer, cooler, imbued with a sense of healing stillness. It carries no burdens, no anxieties, only the promise of profound rest. Let your muscles soften one by one, releasing any lingering tension, any forgotten clenching. From the tips of your toes to the crown of your head, feel a wave of tranquil relaxation wash over you, smoothing away all lines of worry, dissolving all knots of stress. The lore of the ring wraiths, with its tales of ancient men seduced by power, of an inexorable descent into spectral servitude, now serves a different purpose. It is no longer a story of terror, but a cautionary fable whispered gently into the night, a narrative that has reached its definitive end, allowing for a complete and utter release. Their grim journey from mortal kings to instruments of Sauron's will has been fully recounted, bringing a sense of completion that allows your own journey into sleep to be equally complete and undisturbed. Think of the quiet, rolling hills of the Shire, bathed in moonlight, where hobbits sleep soundly in their warm, earthen homes, utterly unaware of the great struggles that once raged across the wider world. Their peace is your peace now, a deep, unassuming tranquility that requires no effort to attain, only the gentle act of letting go. Imagine yourself in such a place, nestled in comfort, surrounded by the soft sounds of the night, perhaps the distant hoot of an owl or the gentle rustle of leaves in a soft breeze, sounds that only deepen your sense of security and calm. The great eye of Sauron, once a terrifying symbol of watchful malice, is now blind, its power shattered, its gaze eternally diminished. The darkness that sought to ensnare the free peoples of Middle-earth has been dispelled, making way for an era of healing and renewal. This profound victory, achieved through great sacrifice and enduring hope, resonates even now as a promise of peace, a guarantee that the night will be undisturbed and your rest will be profound. Let your mind float freely, unanchored by specific thoughts, simply existing in this spacious realm of quietude. The concepts of time and space begin to blur, becoming irrelevant in the face of such deep peace. There is only this moment, this breath, this profound sense of letting go. The weight of the world lifts from your shoulders, replaced by an ethereal lightness, a feeling of being gently cradled by the night itself. The nine, once riders of terror, their black cloaks billowing in the wind, their fell cries chilling the hearts of mortals, are now utterly vanquished. Their reign of fear is a distant memory, a chapter closed in the great book of Middle-earth's history. Their power drawn from the One Ring and the will of their dark master has utterly vanished, leaving no trace, no lingering shadow to disturb your peace. You are safe from their spectral presence, from their cold despair, for they are gone, truly and completely gone. As you breathe in, imagine drawing in pure, tranquil energy, a sense of deep calm that permeates every cell of your being. As you breathe out, release any remaining tension, any stray thought, any tiny sliver of worry that might still cling. Each breath is a gentle wave, carrying you further and further away from the shores of wakefulness into the deep, still ocean of sleep. The story of their origin, of their fateful acceptance of Sauron's rings of power, and their slow, inexorable fading into wraithhood now serves as a testament to the dangers of unchecked ambition and the lure of dark dominion. But that story has concluded, the lesson learned, the conflict resolved. What remains is the profound stillness that follows such a grand narrative's end, a stillness that invites you into your own deep slumber. Think of the vastness of the night sky above the peaceful lands of Middle-earth, an endless canvas of stars that have witnessed countless ages, countless struggles. Yet through it all, the stars remain constant and serene, their light a timeless beacon of peace. You are now aligning yourself with that ancient cosmic calm, allowing its gentle energy to envelop you completely. The very concept of a Nazgûl, a creature bound to the will of another, stripped of its own identity, is a stark contrast to the freedom and repose you are now experiencing. You are unburdened, unbound, entirely your own, drifting effortlessly towards the deepest, most restorative sleep. There are no demands upon you, no masters to serve, only the quiet, profound invitation to rest. Let your mind trace the gentle contours of a sleeping landscape, perhaps the quiet forest floor, softly illuminated by moonlight, where animals rest in their burrows, safe and sound, or the placid surface of a lake reflecting the stars above, its waters still and unruffled. These images are not meant to stimulate, but to soothe, to deepen the sense of pervasive calm that now surrounds you. The history of the Nazgûl, with its long centuries of terror and its climactic defeat, has been fully explored. Its purpose has been served to guide you gently to this place of profound quietude. The details of their spectral existence, their reliance on the One Ring, their relentless pursuit of its bearer, all now fade into the distant hum of memory, no longer holding any sway over your conscious mind. They are merely characters in a finished story, their roles played, their destiny fulfilled, leaving only silence in their wake. The sound of my voice, a soft, continuous stream, is merely a gentle guide, accompanying you on this journey into deep relaxation. It does not demand attention, but rather offers a consistent, soothing presence, a soft current upon which you can effortlessly drift. Allow its rhythm to harmonize with your own slowing breath, leading you further and further into the quiet depths of sleep. All remnants of past anxieties, all echoes of daily concerns are now dissolving, melting away like snow in the gentle warmth of the spring sun. You are entering a sacred space of utter tranquility, where no worries can penetrate, no demands can reach. This is your sanctuary, your haven of rest, prepared for you by the long, winding tales of Middle-earth itself. The defeat of the Nazgûl, a victory hard won after long ages of struggle, ensures that the world is cleansed of their particular brand of terror. This cleansing extends to your own inner landscape, allowing for a profound sense of peace and security. You're shielded, protected, and completely at ease. Imagine the complete absence of light, a gentle, velvety darkness that is not menacing, but profoundly comforting, like a soft, warm blanket drawn over your mind. In this darkness, there are no shapes, no forms, no distractions, only the vast expanse of pure, unadulterated rest. The power of the 9 rings, which once bound the Nazgûl to Sauron's will, has been utterly broken. These ancient artifacts of dark magic, along with their terrible effects, are now nothing but dust, their influence entirely obliterated. You are free from all such ancient enchantments, unbound and at peace. Let your body sink deeper into the surface beneath you, feeling the support beneath you, a gentle embrace that holds you securely. There is no need to hold yourself up, no need to exert any effort. Simply surrender to gravity, to the profound comfort of being utterly supported and at rest. The distant memory of their shrill, terrifying cries, once a harbinger of doom, is now replaced by the sweet, silent whisper of sleep approaching. Those cries no longer hold any power, any capacity to disturb. They are mere echoes of a vanquished past, utterly unable to penetrate the deep layers of peace that now envelop you. The story of the Nazgûl, with its long arc from kings to wraiths, from terrifying hunters to vanquished shadows, has run its full course. It has served its purpose, gently guiding you to this threshold of deep and restorative sleep. Its conclusion marks the beginning of your own profound rest, unburdened and truly at peace. Sleep deeply, sleep peacefully, knowing that all shadows have truly passed, and only peace remains. Now, as you drift further into this boundless serenity, let us turn our minds to the very first stirring of the darkness that would one day coalesce into the Nazgûl. Long before their names were spoken in fear, before their black cloaks swept across the lands of Middle-earth, there was a different kind of dawn, a time when the world was young and many powerful beings walked its surface. Among them was Sauron, the great enemy, though he was not always known by that name, nor was his malice fully revealed. In those distant ages, even Sauron presented himself as a bringer of gifts, a master craftsman, a dispenser of knowledge. He came to the Elves, particularly those of Erosion, whose skill in smithcraft was unmatched in all the world. He called himself Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, and his words were smooth as polished stone, his promises gleaming like newly forged gold. The Elves, in their wisdom and their desire to make the world more beautiful, listened to him. They learned from him, and under his tutelage, their craft reached its zenith. It was then, in the Second Age, a time of flourishing and great artistry, that the rings of power were forged. Many rings there were, some lesser, some greater, but all imbued with a measure of magic and influence. 3 rings were made by the elves alone, without Sauron's direct touch, though the knowledge he imparted was crucial to their creation. These were Narya, Nenya, and Vilya, rings of power and preservation, intended to guard against the ravages of time and decay. These rings were never touched by Sauron's hand, and thus, though they drew upon the same law, they remained pure, untainted by his malice. But then, with Sauron's direct guidance and cunning, 16 more rings were forged by the elven smiths. These were lesser rings than the 3, yet still potent, still imbued with significant power. And it was in secret, in the fires of Mount Doom, the very heart of his dominion, that Sauron himself forged the One Ring. This ring, above all others, was meant to control, to dominate, to bind all other rings to its will, and through them to bind the wills of all who wore them. As the One Ring was completed, Sauron poured a vast measure of his own being, his power, and his malice into it. And in that moment, when the One Ring was set upon his finger, the elves who wore the other rings immediately became aware of his treachery. They felt his presence, his dark intent, and they swiftly removed their rings. The 3, never having been touched by him, remained relatively uncorrupted, though their power was still linked to the One. Knowing his deception was revealed, Sauron raged. He launched a devastating war against the elves, seeking to reclaim the rings of power, especially the 16 that had been forged under his influence. He succeeded in capturing many of them. 7 of these rings he gave to the dwarf lords, hoping to ensnare them. But the dwarves proved resilient, their spirits too stubborn, their minds too focused on gold and stone to be easily swayed by shadowy power. The rings merely magnified their greed and prolonged their lives, but they did not turn them into wraiths. However, 9 of these rings, the 16 lesser rings, Sauron chose for a different purpose, for a different race. These he bestowed upon men, mortal kings and sorcerers and warriors of great renown. Men in their inherent susceptibility to corruption, their longing for power, their fear of death, were the perfect vessels for his dark designs. The rings granted these men immense power and wealth, dominion over others, and lives of extraordinary length. They became mighty lords, sorcerers of great skill, and warriors who achieved great victories. For a time, they revived in their newfound strength, believing themselves to be masters of their own destiny. They wielded their rings to great effect, building empires, amassing treasures, and commanding armies. Yet, with each passing century, the rings slowly but inexorably began their insidious work. The gifts they bestowed were but gilded chains. The extended life they granted was not true life, but a prolonged fading, a slow dissolution of their corporeal forms. Their spirits, bound to the rings, began to be drawn into the unseen world, the shadow realm where Sauron's power was strongest. Their bodies, once vibrant and strong, became thin and ghostly. The pleasures of the world faded for them, their senses dulled, replaced by an ever-growing hunger for power, a cold, empty craving fueled by the rings. Their minds, once sharp and ambitious, became focused solely on the will of the One Ring, and thus on the will of Sauron. They became creatures of pure shadow, their physical forms utterly consumed, their individual identities erased. They were no longer kings, no longer sorcerers, no longer men. They were Nazgûl, ring wraiths, the most terrible servants of the Dark Lord. Their number was 9, forever bound to Sauron, forever enslaved by the rings that had once promised them glory. Their transformation was complete. They existed now in an eternal twilight. Their vision in the seen world dimmed, but their perception of the unseen, the shadow realm, sharpened to an agonizing degree. They sensed the presence of the One Ring with an unholy clarity, a burning obsession that drove them relentlessly. Their very breath became a cold, venomous hiss, their voices a shriek that could curdle blood and instill despair. For many long ages, the Nazgûl served Sauron, his most potent weapons of terror and despair. They were his captains, his messengers, his hunters. They rode on black steeds, their cloaks concealing the spectral emptiness beneath, their very presence casting a pall of dread over the land. Their power was not merely physical, it was psychological, an assault on the spirit, draining hope from the hearts of all who encountered them. Their first great act of service was during the War of the Last Alliance, at the very end of the Second Age. When Sauron was defeated and the One Ring was cut from his hand, the Nazgûl themselves were overthrown. They vanished with their master, their power temporarily broken, their connection to the unseen world disrupted by the shattering of Sauron's physical form. For a time, Middle-earth knew a fragile peace, a brief respite from the shadow. But the Nazgûl, being bound to the One Ring, could not truly perish as long as it existed. As Sauron's spirit lingered, disembodied but not destroyed, so too did theirs. They retreated into the shadows, waiting, slowly gathering strength, their spectral forms reforming in the unseen world. It was in the Third Age, after 1,000 years of relative calm, that the Nazgûl began to stir once more. They re-emerged in the north, in the shadowed lands of Angmar, where the Witch King, their chief, established a kingdom of terror. He waged war against the northern Dunedain, the descendants of the kings of men who had fought Sauron in ages past. He brought ruin and desolation, conquering Arthedain, the last kingdom of the north, and destroying its capital, Fornost. For centuries, the Witch King ruled Angmar, his power growing, his deeds spreading fear throughout the lands. The other Nazgûl were his lieutenants, his instruments of war and domination. They were masters of sorcery and fear, their very names whispered in dread. Eventually, Angmar was defeated by a combined force of elves and men, and the Witch King was driven from the north. But he was not destroyed. It was at this time that the prophecy was made regarding him, that no living man would slay him. This prophecy, spoken by Glorfindel the elf, would echo through the ages, a chilling foreshadowing of his ultimate fate. After his defeat in Angmar, the Witch King retreated to Mordor, where Sauron, still largely disembodied, was slowly beginning to gather his strength once more. The Nazgûl, his most loyal and terrible servants, were instrumental in his return to power. They prepared the way for him, establishing his dominion over Mordor, rebuilding his fortresses, and commanding his growing armies of orcs and other creatures. Their presence solidified Sauron's power, turning Mordor into an impenetrable fortress of evil. The other Nazgûl were given specific roles. Some were sent south to Minas Morgul, the ancient city of Minas Ithil, which they captured and corrupted, turning it into a fortress of dread. The captain of Minas Morgul, often referred to as the Morgul Lord, was none other than the Witch King himself, now strengthened and empowered by Sauron's resurgence. Others of the Nine served as emissaries, riding out into the world to seek out information, to spread fear, and to recruit servants for the Dark Lord. Their black steeds, bred in Mordor, were creatures of fear themselves. their dark eyes reflecting the malice of their riders. As the Third Age drew to its close, and the shadow of Sauron grew ever longer, the Nazgûl became increasingly active. Their primary mission became the relentless hunt for the One Ring. Sauron, having learned of its reappearance and its location in the Shire, sent his 9 Black Riders forth into the world, their quest an all-consuming obsession. They rode across Middle-earth, their black cloaks billowing, their terrifying cries echoing through the night. They were relentless, tireless, driven by the will of their master and the insidious power of the rings that still bound them. Their senses, sharpened by their spectral existence, could detect the presence of the One Ring, even when it was hidden. The closer they drew, the more palpable their dread became, a cold, paralyzing fear that gripped the hearts of all who felt their approach. They pursued Frodo Baggins, the ring-bearer, with an unholy zeal. Their pursuit led them from the Shire, through Bree to Weathertop, where the Witch King himself struck Frodo with a Morgul knife, a blade imbued with dark magic that would slowly turn its victim into a wraith like themselves. It was a cruel irony, a taste of their own fate, offered to the one who carried their master's ultimate weapon. Their hunt continued, relentless and terrifying, until they were thwarted at the ford of Bruinen. The elven lord Glorfindel, aided by the magic of Elrond, Council of Rivendell, caused the river to rise in a mighty flood, sweeping away their horses and their temporary forms. For a brief time, they were dispersed, their power weakened, forced to retreat and reform in the unseen world. But the Nazgûl were not easily defeated. They returned, now mounted on fell beasts, winged creatures of ancient dread, their forms even more terrifying as they soared through the skies. These fell beasts were not born of this world, but were creations of Sauron, grotesque and powerful, capable of carrying the spectral forms of the ringwraiths. Their screeching cries, now amplified by their airborne vantage, spread panic and despair wherever they flew. They played a crucial role in the siege of Minas Tirith, the capital of Gondor. The Witch King, now riding his fell beast, led the assault, breaking the city's gates with his dark magic and spreading terror among the defenders. He seemed unstoppable, his power immense, his presence a harbinger of doom. It was there, on the Pelennor fields, that he finally met his end. The prophecy of Glorfindel, that no living man would slay him, was fulfilled in a way no one could have foreseen. It was Éowyn, a woman, the shield maiden of Rohan, who stood against him, defying his terror. With the aid of Merry Brandybuck, a hobbit, whose ancient barrow's blade struck a blow that broke the enchantments binding the Witch King's spirit, Éowyn plunged her sword into his unseen form, utterly destroying him. His shriek of agony, the last sound he ever uttered, echoed across the battlefield, a sound of absolute despair as his spirit was finally, utterly extinguished. With the destruction of the Witch King, the power of the Nazgûl was severely diminished. Yet 8 remained, still bound to Sauron and the One Ring. They continued to serve, to terrorize, to carry out their master's will. They flew over the armies of the West during their final desperate march to the Black Gate, their presence a constant torment, a psychological weapon designed to drain hope and courage. But their ultimate fate was inextricably linked to that of the One Ring. When Frodo, at long last, reached the cracks of doom and the ring was ultimately destroyed, the power that had created and sustained the Nazgûl was utterly annihilated. Their bond to the unseen world, their very existence, was severed in that cataclysmic moment. With a final, inarticulate shriek of despair and dissolution, the remaining 8 Nazgûl were consumed by the fires of Mount Doom, the same fires that had forged their rings and bound them to Sauron. Their spectral forms dissolved, their power vanished, their ancient enchantment broken forever. They were unmade, vanished into nothingness. Their long, terrifying reign brought to a definitive and unalterable end. The story of the Nazgûl, from their origins as mighty kings to their transformation into spectral terrors, and finally to their utter dissolution, is a testament to the corrosive power of evil and the ultimate triumph of light, however hard won. Their existence, their centuries of terror, their relentless pursuit, all dissolved in the end, leaving behind only peace. This peace now settles over you, deep and profound. The echoes of their history, having guided you to this tranquil space, now fade into the quietude of your own slumber. You are no longer journeying through tales of ancient fears, but sailing gently on a calm sea of rest. The very essence of peace envelops you, a soft, warm embrace that cradles you into the deepest, most restorative sleep. Your mind is quiet, your body is heavy, and your spirit is utterly at ease. All that remains is the profound stillness of perfect rest. The shadows of the past now recede, leaving only the soft glow of serenity. As the last vestiges of the Nazgûl's history melt away, their chilling presence is replaced by an encompassing calm, a blanket of quietude that settles gently upon your senses. The intricate tapestry of their rise and fall, woven with threads of power, corruption, and despair, now unfurls into a smooth, even surface of tranquility. You are drifting, effortlessly, upon a serene current, your thoughts unburdened, your mind at peace. The weight of ancient lore, once a fascinating journey, now transforms into a soothing lullaby, a gentle hum against the canvas of your slumber. Imagine a vast, still lake, its surface mirroring the twilight sky, reflecting the soft, fading hues of a peaceful day. This is the state of your mind now, undisturbed and clear. The ripples of the Nazgûl's story have smoothed out, leaving only the stillness of the water, an unbroken expanse of calm. The wind whispers through the leaves of ancient trees, a soft sigh that carries no urgency, only the promise of rest. Each breath you take is deeper, more even, a slow, rhythmic ebb and flow that guides you further into the gentle embrace of sleep. Recall, if you will, the very first moments of their existence, not in terror, but in the innocent origins of kings, men of power and influence. Before the shadow fell, they were rulers, perhaps just and wise, ambitious and strong, leading their peoples in realms long forgotten. Their lands might have known peace, their subjects prosperity under their early, untainted rule. The rings, offered by Sauron in disguise, were presented as gifts of advancement, of greater dominion, of extended life and intensified power. In that initial offering, there was no overt threat, only the seductive whisper of more. This whisper, though, was the seed of their undoing, a cunning lure that promised everything, but delivered only eternal servitude. The world they knew, the sunlit kingdoms, the bustling cities, the faces of their loved ones, all gradually faded from their perception as the rings tightened their grip. It was a slow, insidious process, not a sudden plunge into darkness, but a gradual dimming of the light, day by day, year by year, until only shadow remained. Their mortal bodies became translucent, their voices mere whispers, their memories fragmented and distorted. The once proud kings became wraiths, bound to the will of another, their individual identities subsumed by the collective horror of the Nazgûl. This transformation, a chilling testament to the power of the rings, was a slow, inexorable turning of the tide, from life to undeath, from self to thrall. Now, let that imagery, the slow fading of light, be replaced by a deeper darkness, not of despair, but of the comforting, velvety blackness of a starlit night. You are held within this darkness, safe and secure. The thoughts that once stirred your mind are now like distant stars, twinkling softly, then slowly fading into the vastness of the cosmos. There is no need to grasp at them, no urge to follow their faint glow. They are simply there, and then, gently, they are not. The journey of the Nazgûl, their relentless hunt for the One Ring, spanned centuries, a testament to their unwavering, albeit enforced, loyalty to Sauron. From the quiet fields of the Shire, where they first sought the Ring-bearer, to the perilous paths of the wilderness, their pursuit was a constant, terrifying shadow. Their black steeds, their dreadful cries, their cloaked forms, all were instruments of their master's will, designed to instill fear and despair. Yet even in their terrifying efficacy, there was a tragic element, a sense of lost potential, of once great men reduced to instruments of pure malevolence. Their ancient power, once wielded for their own kingdoms, was now entirely dedicated to the destruction of all that was good. But even this relentless pursuit, this long, dark vigil, ultimately led to their demise. The very source of their power, the One Ring, became the instrument of their undoing. It is a profound irony, a central theme in the tapestries of Middle-earth, that the greatest evils often contain the seeds of their own destruction. The Nazgûl, forged by the ring, bound to its fate, could not exist without it. Their existence was a reflection of its power, and when that power was unmade, so too were they. As you consider this, allow the meaning to drift over you, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a gentle wave washing over a sandy shore. The wave arrives softly, touches the sand, and then recedes, leaving behind only peace. The intricacies of fate and power, the rise and fall of empires, the struggles between light and shadow. These grand narratives now become whispers carried on a gentle breeze, barely audible, yet deeply soothing. The sound of their final shriek as they were consumed by the fires of Mount Doom was not merely an expression of agony, but of the ultimate unmaking, the dissolution of their very being. It was the sound of a terrifying symphony reaching its discordant final note before absolute silence. This silence, not of absence, but of completion, now envelops you. It is a profound quietude, a deep stillness that invites you to release all tension, all thought, all concern. Imagine yourself floating in a tranquil space, boundless and soft, where the air is still and warm, and the light is a gentle, pervasive glow, neither bright nor dim, but perfectly comforting. There are no edges to this space, no boundaries, only an endless expanse of calm. Your body feels light, yet deeply grounded, perfectly supported. Your breathing is slow and deep, a natural rhythm that perfectly aligns with the peaceful atmosphere around you. The long, winding path of the Nazgûl's history, with its moments of ancient glory, its descent into darkness, its relentless terror, and its final, definitive end, has now fully unfolded and receded. It has served its purpose, gently guiding your mind through a narrative that, by its very conclusion, brings you to a place of utter stillness. The echoes of their story have faded away, like ripples on a pond, eventually smoothing into a perfect, undisturbed surface. You are now in a state of profound rest, a deep and unhurried peace that permeates every fiber of your being. The weight of the world, the concerns of the day, all have dissolved into the quietude that now holds you. There is only this moment, this breath, this exquisite stillness. The journey through ancient lore has brought you home, not to a physical place, but to the inner sanctuary of your own peaceful mind. Allow yourself to sink deeper, to let go completely. The soft current of slumber carries you further, gently rocking you into a restorative sleep. The thoughts that may still linger are like distant clouds, slowly drifting across a vast sky, becoming smaller, fainter, until they too disappear. You are entering a realm where time has no meaning, where worries cannot follow, where only profound peace resides. This is your haven, your quiet harbor. The very essence of rest now wraps around you, a soft, warm embrace that cradles you into the deepest, most restorative sleep. Your mind is quiet, your body is heavy, and your spirit is utterly at ease. All that remains is the profound stillness of perfect rest, a deep and unbroken slumber